Close the door behind you, quickly, now, and leave the rain to the cobbles. Tonight we're stepping out of the biting wind and into the low-beamed shadows of a 17th-century coaching inn. It's a place that smells of damp limestone, wood smoke, and the sharp, yeasty tang of ale that's been sitting in a cellar since the last frost. You can feel the grit of the sawdust beneath your boots and hear the rhythmic thud-clink of the landlord's heavy keys against his belt. It's warm, yes, but it's a heavy sort of warmth. The kind that settles in your lungs and makes you feel like the walls are leaning in to hear what you're whispering. Mind your pockets, though. The firelight is bright, but the corners are deep, and half the people in here are likely hiding from the law, the devil, or a very angry spouse. We're safe for now, tucked into a booth that's seen 300 years of secrets. But don't get too comfortable. Around here, a friendly smile usually comes with a hidden price. So, before we settle in for the night, do consider hitting the like button and subscribing, but only if you've actually enjoyed the journey so far, and I'd love it if you left your location and local time in the comments. It's always a pleasure to see where you're tuning in from as you prepare to drift off. Now, dim those lights, maybe click on a fan for a bit of background noise, and let's see what tonight's shadows have in store for us. You push the door open, and it resists for just a second, wood swollen from damp English weather, before giving way with a long complaining creak. Inside, the light is low and gold, coming mostly from a hearth that looks like it's been burning continuously since the last monarch changed, which, in 17th century England, happens more often than you'd expect. The room is crowded but not packed, the kind of fullness where every bench is occupied and every table hosts at least one animated conversation. Your boot sticks slightly to the rush-covered floor. That's your first lesson. Cleanliness here is aspirational. The rushes, bundles of straw and herbs, are meant to absorb spills and smells, and occasionally they're changed, occasionally. You try not to think too hard about what's been soaked into them over the past weeks, or months, or, in one corner, possibly since the reign of James, a few heads turn as you enter. Not dramatically. This isn't a movie, but enough that you feel the quiet assessment. You're new, you're unfamiliar, and in a place like this that matters. Taverns are social hubs, yes, but they're also tight-knit ecosystems. Everyone knows everyone, or at least knows who owes whom money. You take a few cautious steps inside, adjusting to the haze. Smoke curls lazily from the hearth and from long-stemmed pipes clenched between teeth. Tobacco has only recently become popular in England, imported from the New World, and already it's everywhere. There's a faint sweetness to it, mixed with the sharper scent of burning wood and the underlying note of ale. Ah yes, the ale. Even before you see it, you smell it. Yeasty, sour, and oddly comforting. In the 17th century, ale is safer to drink than water in many places, thanks to the brewing process killing off harmful bacteria. That's your mainstream historical fact for the night, and also your gentle reminder that your standards for safe hydration are about to take a bit of a hit. A sturdy wooden counter stretches along one wall, behind which stands the tavern keeper, a broad figure with an apron that has definitely seen better days. They glance at you briefly, then back to the task of filling a tankard from a large barrel. There's no menu, no chalkboard listing craft options with quirky names. You get what's available, and you're grateful for it. You hover for a moment, deciding where to sit. A long communal table seems your best bet. Private seating is not really a thing here unless you're important, wealthy, or both. As you slide onto a bench, the wood creaks in protest, and the man beside you shifts slightly to make room, though he doesn't look at you directly. The table itself is worn smooth from years of use, etched with faint knife marks and the occasional carved initial. Someone at some point has tried to immortalize their existence here with a shaky TW. You silently wish them luck with that. Across from you, a woman laughs, a loud, unrestrained sound that cuts through the murmur of the room. She slaps the table, nearly knocking over a tankard, and continues her story with dramatic gestures. You don't catch all the words, but you gather it involves a neighbour, a pig, and a misunderstanding that escalated far beyond what anyone intended. Honestly, it sounds like the 17th century version of a viral video. You notice the clothing now. Rough wool, mostly in muted browns and glaze, though a few patrons sport slightly brighter hues, deep reds, faded blues, suggesting a bit more wealth or at least a willingness to spend it on appearance. Hats are common, though many have been set aside indoors. Faces are weathered, lined from outdoor work and a life without sunscreen. And yes, before you ask, people here are not exactly prioritizing skincare routines. Moisturizer is not trending. You become aware of the soundscape, the clink of pottery and metal, the scrape of benches, the low rumble of conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter. Somewhere near the hearth, someone is singing, not particularly well, but with enthusiasm that makes up for it. A young server approaches, carrying 2 tankards with surprising steadiness. They pause by your table, giving you a quick once-over. "Allah," they ask, as if there is any other conceivable answer. You nod, because of course you do. This is not the moment to request sparkling water with a slice of lemon. The server disappears and returns moments later, setting a tankard in front of you with a solid thunk. You look down at it. The liquid inside is cloudy, a pale amber with a faint foam clinging to the edges. It's not exactly Instagram-worthy, but it's authentic. You lift it cautiously, take a sip, and immediately understand why people here don't drink this for the taste alone. It's mild, slightly sour, and surprisingly low in alcohol compared to what you might expect. This is small beer or weak ale, consumed daily by all ages. Here's a quirky tidbit. Even children often drink this kind of ale because it's safer than water. So if you ever feel like your childhood was unusual, just remember, you probably weren't handed a tankard as part of your daily hydration plan. You set the tankard down, adjusting to the flavour, and glance around again. The initial curiosity about you has faded. You're now just another presence in the room. That's a good sign. It means you're blending in, at least enough to avoid immediate suspicion. Near the hearth, a group of men lean close together, speaking in low tones. One of them glances around periodically, as if checking who might be listening. Taverns are not just places for food and drink, they're centres of information exchange. News travels here, rumours spread, deals are made. Sometimes legal ones, sometimes less so. Historians still argue whether taverns were primarily social spaces, or if they functioned as informal hubs of political and economic activity. Standing here, watching those hushed conversations, you get the sense it's very much both. A sudden gust of wind pushes the door open again, and a new arrival steps in, bringing with them a swirl of cold night air. For a brief moment the smoke shifts, and you catch a clearer view of the room. The beams overhead blackened with soot, the uneven walls, the flickering light casting long shadows. Then the door closes, the warmth settles back in, and the tavern resumes its steady rhythm. You take another sip of your ale, this time with less hesitation. It's not so bad, once you stop expecting it to taste like anything you've had before. Around you the conversations continue, the laughter rises and falls, and the fire crackles in a way that feels oddly reassuring. You realise something. For all its grime and noise and questionable hygiene, this place is, in its own way, deeply comforting. It's a refuge from the outside world, a place where people gather, share stories, and momentarily forget the hardships waiting beyond those wooden walls. Of course, you also realise you've been sitting on a bench that may or may not have been cleaned this decade, drinking from a tankard that has definitely seen some things. But hey, you came for authenticity. And authenticity does not come with a sanitation guarantee. You lean back slightly, letting the atmosphere settle around you. The tavern hums with life, each person a small thread in the larger tapestry of this moment in time. And as the firelight flickers and the voices blend into a steady murmur, you begin to feel less like an outsider, and more like someone who belongs here, at least for the night. Your tankard is only half empty, an impressive feat considering the flavour. And already someone nudges a wooden bowl toward the centre of the table. No ceremony, no explanation. It simply arrives like weather. You glance down and try to identify what's inside. Stew. Probably it's thick, dark, and dotted with chunks of something that used to be more recognisable. A faint steam rises from it, carrying the smell of onions, herbs, and meat that has been cooking long enough to forget its original shape. You hesitate just long enough to remind yourself, this is dinner now. You reach for the spoon, communal naturally, and dip it in. The texture is hearty, bordering on stubborn, and when you bring it to your mouth, the taste is surprisingly rich. Salted meat, maybe beef or mutton, softened by hours of simmering. Root vegetables lend a faint sweetness. It's not refined, but it's filling. And in a time when missing meals is a real possibility, filling is the goal. This is a mainstream historical reality. Taverns often served simple, hearty fare designed to sustain labourers. Stews, bread, cheese, and whatever meat was available. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted. You chew thoughtfully, trying not to think about how long that stew has been evolving. Because here's the thing, pots like this aren't always emptied at the end of the day. They're topped up, ingredients added over time, a kind of culinary continuity that's charming in theory and slightly alarming in practice. Congratulations, you may be tasting last week. A man across from you tears into a hunk of bread with visible enthusiasm. It's coarse and dense, made from barley or rye rather than fine wheat. White bread exists, but it's for the wealthy. This is everyday bread. The kind that fights back a little when you bite it. You take a piece offered your way. It's dry but sturdy, perfect for soaking up the stew. You do exactly that, because if there's one thing you're learning quickly, it's that technique matters. You're adapting, you're surviving, you're honestly kind of proud of yourself. Someone slides a small wedge of cheese onto the table. It's sharp, pungent, and carries a scent that could politely be described as assertive. You try a bite and immediately understand why it pairs so well with ale. It needs something to calm it down. Nearby, a man raises his tankard and declares something about good harvests and better company, which earns a scattered chorus of agreement. Toasts here are casual, frequent, and occasionally nonsensical. You lift your tankard slightly in solidarity, because blending in feels like the safer option. A server passes again, this time carrying a platter with what looks like roasted meat. The skin is crisp, glistening in the firelight, and for a moment the entire table watches it go by like it's a celebrity. Meat like that is less common, more expensive, more of a treat. You file that away as something to aspire to, should your imaginary 17th century wallet ever improve. You notice something else now. The pace of eating is unhurried. People linger over their food, not because they're savouring every bite like a gourmet experience, but because this is also their social time. Meals are shared, conversations stretch, and no one is checking a phone or glancing at a clock. Time here moves differently, slower, thicker, like the stew itself. A man to your left leans in slightly. First time, he asks. Not unkindly, you nod, because apparently your confusion has been noted. He gestures at your tankard. You'll want to keep that full, he says. Water'll do you no favours. He's not wrong. In many towns, clean drinking water is unreliable, often contaminated. Ale, even weak ale, is the safer bet. It's a strange reversal of your usual instincts. Hydration by beer, but here it makes perfect sense. Historians still argue whether people in this period were constantly mildly intoxicated, or if the low alcohol content of small beer meant they functioned mostly normally. Sitting here, watching steady hands and coherent conversations, you suspect it's the latter. Though give it a few more tankards, and the line might blur. You take another sip, this time almost automatically. The taste is becoming familiar, even comforting in a way, like background noise for your mouth. A sudden burst of laughter erupts from the far side of the room. You glance over to see a man attempting to balance a spoon on his nose, while another cheers him on. It's not exactly high entertainment, but it's effective. The spoon falls. The room reacts as if something monumental has occurred. There's your first joke of the evening, courtesy of history. Apparently, human humour has always included, "Look what I can balance on my face." You return to your stew, now noticeably lower in the bowl. The communal nature of the meal means it's disappearing at a steady pace, each person taking a share without much fuss. There's an unspoken rhythm to it. Take, eat, pass, repeat. A woman at the table begins describing a recipe, gesturing with her spoon. Something about herbs and a particular way of salting meat to make it last longer. Preservation is a constant concern here. Without refrigeration, food must be salted, smoked, or otherwise treated to prevent spoilage. It shapes everything about the cuisine: strong flavours, heavy seasoning, and a certain tolerance for ambiguity. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some taverns were known to flavour their ales with herbs and spices not just for taste, but to mask imperfections in the brewing process. So if your drink tastes a little creative, that might not be entirely by design. You glance at your tankard again, suddenly a bit more curious about what exactly went into it. Then you decide not to ask. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. The fire crackles louder as someone adds another log, sending a brief shower of sparks upward. The warmth deepens and you feel it settle into your bones. Outside, the night is likely cold and damp, but in here it's almost cozy enough to forget that. Almost, because then you notice the draft, a thin line of cool air sneaking along the floor, brushing against your boots. The building isn't exactly airtight, and somewhere in the rafters, there's a faint scratching sound that suggests you are not the only one enjoying the tavern's hospitality. You choose not to look up. A new dish appears, a small plate of something fried. You lean closer. They look like little patties. Browned on the outside, you try one. It's crisp, savoury, with a hint of spice. Eel, someone says casually. You pause mid-chew. Eel, of course it is. You nod slowly, committing to the experience. Honestly, it's not bad. If no one had told you, you might have just called it mysterious but acceptable. Second joke of the night. You came in expecting maybe chicken, maybe beef, and instead you're out here discovering your hidden appreciation for eel like it's a personality trait. The conversation around you shifts, as it tends to do, from food to daily life. Work mostly. Fields, trades, small grievances. The rhythm of ordinary existence. You catch fragments, complaints about weather, about prices, about someone named Thomas, who apparently cannot be trusted with anything involving livestock. It's grounding, in a way. These are not grand historical figures making sweeping decisions. These are everyday people, navigating their lives one meal, one conversation at a time. And yet, even here, larger events ripple through. Someone mentions news from London. Something about politics, about tensions that may or may not escalate. The details are vague, second-hand. Information travels slowly and accuracy is flexible. Historians still argue whether taverns played a significant role in spreading political ideas during this period, especially leading up to events like the English Civil War. Listening to these snippets of conversation, you can see how ideas might take root here, passed from person to person over shared food and drink. Your bowl is nearly empty now. You scrape the last bits with your bread, determined not to waste anything. Waste is not just frowned upon, it's impractical. As you finish, you realize something subtle but important. You're no longer hesitating before each bite or sip. The initial uncertainty has faded. You've adapted to the flavors, the textures, the rhythm of the place. You're part of it now. Or at least, you're close enough to blend in without drawing attention. And as another round of ale is poured somewhere nearby, and the fire continues its steady burn, you settle a little deeper into the bench, letting the warmth and noise wrap around you like a slightly questionable but very persistent blanket. The longer you sit, the more the tavern begins to sort itself into patterns. Not neat, orderly ones, but the kind you only notice after your eyes adjust and your expectations quietly lower. What first felt like a blur of faces now becomes a cast of regulars, each playing a role so familiar it barely needs explanation. To your right, a pair of labourers sit shoulder to shoulder, their hands rough and permanently stained from work that doesn't wash off easily. They speak in low, steady tones, punctuated by long pauses and slow drinks. These are men who measure their words the way they measure their energy, carefully, because both are limited resources. Every now and then, one of them nods, as if confirming a truth that doesn't need repeating. Across the room, near the hearth, you spot someone very different. His clothes are just a touch finer, cleaner lines, a deeper colour, boots that haven't entirely given up on life. He gestures more when he speaks, his voice carrying slightly above the others. A tradesman, perhaps, or someone who wants to be seen as one. Status here is subtle, but it's present. Even in a tavern, hierarchy seeps in like that draft along the floor. You begin to understand something important. Taverns are one of the few places where social boundaries blur, but they never fully disappear. A farmer might sit near a merchant, a craftsman might share a table with a traveller, but everyone still knows on some level where they stand. That's your mainstream historical fact for this stretch of the night. Taverns in 17th century England were among the rare spaces where different social classes mixed, though not always as equals. Think of it as a very early version of a comment section. Everyone's present, but not everyone's voice carries the same weight. A sudden clap of hands pulls your attention back. A man has stood up near the centre of the room, clearly mid-story. You didn't see him rise, But now that he's speaking, it's impossible to ignore. And I tell you, he says, swaying slightly, the horse knew the way better than I did. There's laughter, some genuine, some polite, some already tired of this particular tale. He's a storyteller, or at least someone who believes he is. Every tavern has one, possibly several. You catch fragments as he continues. A journey, a storm, a near miss with something that might have been a ditch, or might have been an exaggerated memory. Details shift with each sentence. Accuracy is not the goal here. Entertainment is third joke of the night. If this man had access to social media, he would absolutely be posting true story threads that get increasingly questionable by the third paragraph. Still, people listen. Stories are currency in a place like this. They pass the time, build reputations, and sometimes carry warnings disguised as humour. At the far end of your table, a quieter figure sits slightly apart from the rest. He hasn't spoken much, but he's been watching, observing the room with a kind of calm attention. His clothes are plain, but well kept. There's something about him that doesn't quite fit the rhythm of the others. A traveller, maybe, or someone with business that doesn't benefit from being loudly announced. He catches you looking and gives a small nod, not unfriendly, just acknowledging you return it, because that seems like the correct response when you have no idea what else to do. Nearby, a group of younger men are engaged in a game involving dice. The rules are not immediately clear, but the stakes are. Coins clink against the table, and every roll is followed by a collective intake of breath or a groan of disappointment. Gambling is a common pastime here, though not always encouraged by authorities. Taverns often walk a fine line between being social spaces and being seen as places of vice. Dice games, card games, even simple wagers. They all add a layer of tension beneath the surface. Historians still argue whether these games were mostly harmless razvlečments, or if they contributed significantly to debt and disorder among the lower classes. Watching the intensity on these players' faces, you can see both possibilities unfolding at once. One of the dice rolls off the table and disappears into the rushes. There's a brief pause as everyone considers the implications of retrieving it. Finally, someone shrugs and produces another die from a pocket, as if this is a problem they've solved many times before. You sip your ale again, now on what must be your second tankard. The edges of the room feel softer, the sounds blending more smoothly. You're not drunk exactly, more like gently untethered from your usual senses of time and space. A woman moves through the room with practiced ease, balancing a tray of tankards. She exchanges quick words with several patrons, her tone shifting subtly depending on who she's speaking to. Friendly here, firm there, teasing somewhere in between. Running a tavern, or even working in one, requires a kind of social agility that's almost an art form. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tavern keepers, especially women, were known for their sharp wit and ability to manage unruly customers with nothing more than a well-timed remark. Think less customer service smile, and more I will verbally dismantle you if you cause trouble. You watch as she deftly sidesteps a man who's had a bit too much ale, redirecting him back to his seat with a light touch on his shoulder and a look that says, "Not tonight." Near the door, two men are deep in conversation, their heads close together. One produces a folded piece of paper, rare enough to catch your eye, and taps it with a finger. "Came from London," he says. The other leans in, eyes narrowing. "News. Real or not, it carries weight. Written words even more so." Literacy is growing in this period, but it's far from universal. A single letter can hold power, especially if it contains information others don't yet have. You can't hear the details, but you can feel the shift. Conversations nearby quiet slightly, attention drifting toward that small unfolding exchange. Information you realize is as valuable here as food or drink. Maybe more. A sudden bark of laughter breaks the tension, pulling the room back to its usual rhythm. The storyteller has reached another dramatic peak, gesturing wildly, as if physically wrestling with the memory he's describing. You lean back, letting the scene settle around you again. The tavern is no longer just a place, it's a network. Of people, of stories, of quiet transactions and unspoken agreements, and you're in the middle of it. The man beside you finally speaks again, nodding toward the dice game. "Lost half a week's wages there once," he says, almost casually. You glance at him, unsure how to respond. "Won it back the next night," he adds with a faint smile. You nod, because that feels like the kind of story that doesn't require verification. It exists because it's satisfying, not because it's provable. Across the room, the traveller, the quiet one, stands. He adjusts his coat, exchanges a few words with the tavern keeper, and slips a coin onto the counter. His movements are efficient, deliberate. For a moment, you wonder where he's headed. What brought him here? What he knows that you don't. Then he's gone, the door opening and closing with that same familiar creak, letting in a brief gust of cold air before sealing the warmth back inside. You're left with the echo of his presence, a reminder that not everyone here is rooted in this place. Some are passing through, carrying stories from elsewhere, leaving with new ones tucked away. And as you take another slow sip of your ale, watching the dice roll, the stories unfold, and the quiet exchanges continue, you realize that this tavern, this single smoky room, is a crossroads of lives you'll never fully know, which somehow makes it even more compelling. The night leans further in without asking permission. You don't notice the exact moment it happens, but the tavern shifts, voices dip lower, laughter grows a little looser, and the fire settles into a deeper, steadier burn. What was once a lively hum becomes something softer, more layered. Conversations overlap like threads in a worn tapestry. You feel it too. That gentle heaviness behind your eyes, the warmth in your chest from the fire and the ale working quietly together. Time has stretched, blurred at the edges. If someone told you it had been hours, you'd believe them. If they said minutes, that might also make sense. A fresh log is added to the hearth, sending a flicker of light across the room. Shadows shift along the beams overhead, briefly revealing just how uneven the ceiling is. Wood warped from years of smoke and heat. You imagine how many nights like this it has witnessed. How many stories have risen into those rafters and settled there like invisible dust. At your table, the energy has mellowed. The earlier bursts of laughter have given way to slower conversations, punctuated by thoughtful pauses. The stew is long gone, the bowl scraped clean and forgotten, but the tankards remain, refilled, replaced, or simply held as a kind of anchor. A man across from you leans in, lowering his voice. "You hear about the road past the mill?" he asks, glancing briefly to either side. There's a subtle shift. People listen without appearing to. "Not safe after dark," he continues. "Travellers say there's something there. Ah, here it is. Every tavern, every era. There's always a story that lives just at the edge of belief." You tilt your head slightly, playing along. "Something?" you echo. He nods, satisfied. Lights where there shouldn't be. Sounds. One fellow swore he saw a figure, no face, just standing there. A few murmurs ripple through the table, some amused, some less so. Here's your quirky tidbit for this hour. In 17th century England, tales of spirits, omens, and supernatural happenings were not just entertainment. They were often taken seriously, woven into everyday understanding of the world. Ghost stories weren't campfire fun. They were explanations. You glance toward the door, as if half expecting it to open on its own. It doesn't. The wind outside gives it a soft rattle, though, just enough to make the story linger a little longer in your mind. "Probably just smugglers," someone else says, shrugging. "Or fools with lanterns." That earns a few nods. Practical explanations always try to win out, even here. Historians still argue whether belief in the supernatural during this period was driven more by genuine conviction or by the lack of scientific frameworks to explain strange phenomena. Sitting here, you get the sense it's both, belief and uncertainty sharing the same bench, sipping from the same tankard. You take a slower sip of your ale, noticing how the taste has softened. Not because it's changed, but because you have. What was once sharp and unfamiliar now feels almost expected, like a background note in the evening. Near the hearth, the storyteller has finally taken a seat, his energy spent. In his place, a quieter exchange unfolds. Two people speaking in low tones, heads close together. There's a seriousness to it now, a weight that wasn't there earlier. You catch a word here and there. Coin, delivery, tomorrow. Not everything in a tavern is meant to be overheard. Some conversations are built to stay exactly where they are, dissolving into the smoke and the noise. A chair scrapes somewhere behind you, loud enough to draw attention. A man stands a little too quickly, steadying himself with a hand on the table. His friends chuckle, one of them offering an if slightly amused pat on the back. "Time to head home," one says. "Or try to," another adds. Second joke of the night. Well, technically the third or fourth, but who's counting anymore? Navigation becomes a lot more theoretical after a few tankards of 17th century ale. The unsteady man nods with exaggerated seriousness, as if embarking on a great journey rather than a short walk through dark, uneven streets. He makes his way toward the door, each step a careful negotiation with gravity. You watch as he exits, the door opening to reveal a slice of night. Cool, dark, and quiet compared to the tavern's warmth. Then it closes again and he's gone, swallowed by whatever waits outside. It's a reminder. This place, for all its comfort, is temporary. A pause. A shelter between one part of life and the next. At the counter, the tavern keeper counts coins, stacking them with practiced efficiency. There's no register, no digital tally, just memory, habit, and a sharp eye for who has paid and who still owes. Running a tavern is no small task. It's part host, part accountant, part peacekeeper, and occasionally part detective. A man approaches the counter, speaking quietly. The tavern keeper listens, expression unreadable, then nods once. A coin changes hands. A small agreement, sealed without ceremony. You realize how much of this world runs on trust. Fragile, constantly tested, but necessary. Without it, nothing here would function. The fire pops, drawing your gaze back. The flames are lower now, the wood settling into glowing embers. The light they cast is softer, more intimate. Faces are half-lit, features blurred at the edges. You lean back slightly, feeling the bench beneath you, the solid weight of it grounding you in the moment. The air is still thick with smoke, but you barely notice anymore. It's part of the environment now, like the sound of voices or the warmth of the fire. Across the table, someone yawns, not bothering to hide it. Another stretches, joints cracking audibly. The night is winding down, though no one has announced it. It's a gradual unraveling, each person reaching their own quiet conclusion. You think about everything you've seen in these past hours. The arrival, the food, the shifting cast of characters, the stories both loud and whispered. It's more than just a tavern. It's a small world, contained within four walls and a roof that's seen better days. And yet, it works. Imperfectly, noisily, but it works. A final round of ale is poured somewhere nearby, though you pass this time. Not out of judgment, just a sense that you've reached the natural end of your evening here. You rest your hands on the table, feeling the worn wood beneath your fingers. There's something oddly comforting about it. This shared surface that has held countless meals, conversations, and fleeting moments just like this one. As you sit there, letting the last of the night settle around you, you realize that leaving won't feel abrupt. It will feel like stepping out of a story that continues without you, because it does. The tavern doesn't revolve around any one person. It holds everyone for a while, then lets them go. You take one last look around. The fire, the faces, the quiet exchanges still unfolding. It all feels a little softer now, a little more distant, like a memory already forming even as you're still inside it. And when you finally stand, the bench creaking softly in response, no one makes a fuss. A few glances, a subtle nod here and there. You've been part of the room, and now you're moving on from it just like everyone else eventually does. The door waits, slightly warped, ready to resist for a moment before giving way. Beyond it, the night stretches out, cool, dark, and carrying the faint promise of whatever comes next. You pause with your hand on the wood, feeling the warmth of the tavern at your back. Then, gently, you push it open. Imagine travelling on a 19th century sleeper train. You step forward with the slow-moving crowd, boots tapping against the wooden planks of the platform. The train looms beside you, dark, glossy, and slightly intimidating. Gas lamps flicker overhead, casting long shadows across the carriages, each window glowing faintly like a row of watchful eyes. A porter passes by carrying luggage that looks heavier than your entire modern travel kit. No lightweight backpacks here, just sturdy trunks, leather cases, and bundles tied with rope. You instinctively pat your pockets as if checking for your phone, then remember, wrong century, wrong priorities. Your main concern now is whether your assigned berth will be tolerable or vaguely survivable. You find your carriage and climb the narrow metal steps, gripping the rail that's cool to the touch. Inside, the air is warmer, tinged with a mix of upholstery, dust, and the ever-present coal smoke sneaking in from the engine ahead. It's not unpleasant exactly, just persistent. A conductor stands near the entrance, checking tickets with practiced efficiency. You hand yours over, trying to look like someone who belongs here, and not like someone mentally comparing this to a modern sleeper train with Wi-Fi and power outlets. He nods and gestures down the corridor. Third compartment, left, simple enough. You move down the narrow aisle, brushing past other passengers who are doing the same delicate dance of finding their place without stepping on each other's toes. The corridor is just wide enough for one person and a questionable amount of luggage, which means every encounter is a polite negotiation of space. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Sleeper trains in the 19th century were a relatively new innovation, especially popularized in the United States by George Pullman in the 1860s, offering travelers the ability to sleep during long journeys instead of sitting upright all night, which sounds luxurious until you actually see the setup. You reach your compartment and pause. It's compact, very compact. Two narrow benches face each other, upholstered in a fabric that has definitely hosted more travelers than it can remember. Above them, folded into the wall, are the upper berths, thin mattresses tucked neatly away for now, waiting to be unfolded like a slightly ominous surprise. You step inside, setting your belongings down with care. The space creaks faintly under your weight, as if acknowledging your arrival with mild concern. Across from you, another passenger is already seated. He gives you a brief nod, polite, reserved, the universal signal of, "We will be sharing this space, but we do not yet know how awkward that will be." You return the nod, because that's the correct response in every century. Outside, a whistle blows. Sharp, commanding. The sound cuts through the station noise, signaling that departure is near. There's a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a collective tightening of attention as people settle in, finish last-minute conversations, and prepare for movement. You sit down on the bench, testing it. It's firm. Not uncomfortable exactly, but definitely not what you'd call inviting. You imagine it transforming into your bed later, and feel a small, quiet concern settle in your mind. The train jolts slightly, a gentle but unmistakable nudge. Then another, and then, with a slow, determined motion, it begins to move. The platform outside slides past the window, faces blurring into streaks of light and shadow. The station recedes, replaced by darkness punctuated by the occasional lantern or distant building. You're on your way. The rhythm of the train quickly establishes itself. A steady clatter of wheels against rails, a metallic heartbeat that fills the space. It's not loud enough to overwhelm, but it's constant, impossible to ignore. You feel it through the seat, through the floor, through the very structure of the carriage. It's oddly soothing, or at least it will be. Eventually, for now it's just new. Your fellow passenger shifts slightly, adjusting his coat. "Long journey?" he asks, his voice low enough to match the intimate space. You nod. "Overnight." He gives a small, knowing smile. "Best get used to the motion." You glance around again, taking in the details you missed before. The small hooks on the wall for hanging coats, the narrow luggage rack above the door, the faint flicker of a gas lamp mounted in the corner, its light wavering gently with the movement of the train. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early sleeper cars often used gas lighting, which, while convenient, carried its own risks. Leaks, fume, and the occasional unsettling flicker that makes every shadow feel a bit more alive than it should be. So if the lighting feels dramatic, just remember, it's not a design choice, it's a mild hazard. You lean back, letting your head rest against the wall. The motion of the train creates a subtle sway, a side-to-side rhythm that feels almost like being rocked. It's not unpleasant, just unfamiliar enough to keep you alert. In the corridor, footsteps pass by, accompanied by muffled conversations. Somewhere a child laughs, quickly hushed by a parent. The sounds are close, intimate, as if the entire train is one long shared room divided only by thin walls and mutual tolerance. Historians still argue whether early sleeper trains were truly comfortable innovations, or simply a slightly improved version of enduring long-distance travel. Sitting here, feeling every vibration and hearing every sound, you suspect the answer depends heavily on how optimistic you're feeling. You shift your position, trying to find a more comfortable angle. The bench resists slightly, reminding you that ergonomics is a concept still waiting to be invented. Your fellow passenger pulls out a small pocket watch, checks the time, then tucks it away. There's a quiet ritual to it, a sense of marking the journey, not just by distance but by moments. Outside the window, the world is mostly dark now. Occasionally, you catch glimpses of passing landscapes. Trees, fields, the faint outline of a farmhouse lit by a single lamp. It feels distant, almost unreal, as if you're moving through a series of painted backdrops. The train picks up speed, the rhythm quickening just enough to be noticeable. The sway becomes more pronounced, the sounds more insistent. You adjust again, bracing one foot slightly against the floor to steady yourself. Third joke of the night. You came here expecting a gentle, lulling ride, and instead you're learning the fine art of sleeping while mildly shaken like a Victorian cocktail. Still, there's something undeniably fascinating about it. The sense of movement, of crossing distances that would have taken days by carriage, now compressed into hours. Its progress you can feel, quite literally, in your bones. A soft knock on the compartment door startles you slightly. It slides open, revealing a porter. "Berths will be prepared shortly," he says, his tone professional but not unfriendly. You nod, suddenly aware that your current seating arrangement is about to transform into something else entirely. He moves on, repeating the announcement down the corridor. You glance at your fellow passenger, who seems unfazed. Clearly, this is not his first time navigating the nightly ritual of sleeper travel. You, on the other hand, are about to find out exactly how a pair of benches becomes a bed, and whether that transformation leans more toward ingenious or questionable. The train continues its steady journey into the night, carrying you along with it, deeper into a world where sleep, travel, and mild discomfort are about to become very closely acquainted. The porter's announcement lingers in the corridor like a quiet countdown, and suddenly the compartment feels smaller, not physically, but in expectation. You and your fellow passenger both shift slightly, as if preparing for a transformation you've only heard about but never witnessed. Without much ceremony, the door slides open again. The porter returns, this time with purpose. He moves efficiently, like someone who has performed this exact routine hundreds, maybe thousands of times. "Evening," he says, already reaching for the bench beneath you. You stand quickly, stepping aside as he grips the seat and pulls. The entire structure shifts with a soft wooden groan, sliding outward and flattening into a broader surface. It's surprisingly smooth, almost elegant in its simplicity. Then he reaches upward, unlatching the upper berth. It folds down with a controlled swing, revealing a thin mattress tucked inside. In less than a minute, your modest seating area has become a stacked sleeping arrangement. You blink. That's it. That's your bedroom. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Early sleeper cars used convertible berths, benches that folded down and upper bunks that dropped from the wall, allowing multiple passengers to share a small space efficiently. It was a clever use of design, though comfort was negotiable. The porter adds a few finishing touches: a folded blanket, a small pillow that looks optimistic at best, and a thin curtain that can be drawn for a hint of privacy. Then he steps back, nods once, and moves on to the next compartment. You're left staring at your new sleeping arrangement. Your fellow passenger gestures upward. You can take the top if you like. You consider it. The upper berth is narrow, just wide enough for a person who doesn't move much in their sleep. There's a small strap along the edge, presumably to prevent you from rolling off and introducing yourself to the floor in a very abrupt way. "Thanks," you say, deciding to embrace the full experience. Climbing up is a careful process. There's no ladder, just a series of small footholds and a bit of faith. You manage it, settling onto the mattress with a cautious shift of weight. It creaks softly but holds. You lie back. The ceiling is closer than you'd prefer. Not alarmingly so, but enough that you're aware of it. You can't sit up fully without bumping your head, which you discover immediately. A gentle but firm reminder from the carriage. Know your limits. Second joke of the night. Congratulations, you've upgraded from bench with opinions to shelf with blankets. Below, your fellow passenger arranges his space with practiced ease, removing his coat, folding it neatly, and placing it near his pillow. He moves like someone who has done this before, someone who understands the rhythm of sleeper travel. You, on the other hand, are still figuring out where your arms are supposed to go. The train continues its steady motion, the clatter of wheels now more noticeable in this quieter, more enclosed setup. The sound travels through the frame of the berth, a constant vibration that you feel as much as hear. You pull the blanket over yourself. It's coarse but warm, carrying a faint tint of wool and something less identifiable. You decide not to investigate too closely. A soft hiss from the gas lamp fills the silence. The light flickers slightly, casting shifting shadows across the compartment. You reach up and adjust the small valve, dimming it just enough to take the edge off without plunging everything into darkness. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some passengers in early sleeper cars would bring their own bedding, sheets, blankets, even pillows, to avoid using the provided one, which were not always freshly laundered. Suddenly, that thin mattress feels a bit more like a shared experience than a personal one. You shift again, trying to find a comfortable position. The berth is narrow enough that you can't really roll over without thinking about it first. Every movement is deliberate, calculated. Below, you hear your fellow passenger settle in, the fabric of his clothing rustling softly. There's a brief silence, then a quiet sigh. The universal sound of someone attempting to sleep in less than ideal conditions. You close your eyes. For a moment it almost works. The rhythm of the train is steady, almost hypnotic. The gentle sway, the repetitive clatter. It's the kind of motion that could lull you to sleep under the right circumstances. These are not entirely the right circumstances. A sudden jolt runs through the carriage, sharper than the others. You tense instinctively, gripping the edge of the berth. The train steadies again, but the moment lingers. Third joke of the night. Just when you start to drift off, the train decides to remind you that it is, in fact, a large metal object moving at speed over tracks that were laid with 19th century precision. You exhale slowly, trying to relax again. Outside, the darkness continues to slide past, broken occasionally by distant lights. The window in your compartment offers only a partial view from your angle, but you catch glimpses, faint reflections, passing shapes, the suggestion of a world moving alongside you. Somewhere further down the carriage, a baby begins to cry. It's not loud, but in the quiet of the night, it carries. The sound is quickly soothed, hushed into a softer rhythm. You open your eyes again, staring at the ceiling. Sleep, it seems, is going to be a negotiation. Historians still argue whether passengers truly rested well on these early sleeper trains, or simply endured the night in a semi-conscious state. Lying here, aware of every sound and movement, you lean toward the latter. You adjust your position again, this time turning slightly onto your side. It's better. Not perfect, but better. The train enters a stretch of track that feels smoother, the motion less abrupt. The clatter softens into a more even rhythm, like a steady drumbeat. Your breathing slows, unconsciously matching it. For a few minutes you drift, not fully asleep, but close enough to feel the edges blur. Thoughts come and go, unanchored, slipping between the present moment and vague impressions of elsewhere. Then, another jolt. You're back, not startled exactly, just reminded. Below, your fellow passenger shifts, muttering something under his breath. Even the experienced travellers aren't immune to the realities of the rails. You pull the blanket a little tighter, tucking it around your shoulders. The air in the compartment has cooled slightly, the warmth from earlier giving way to a more neutral nighttime chill. A faint whistle sounds in the distance, long, low, echoing through the dark. It's both comforting and eerie, a signal of movement and isolation all at once. You find yourself listening to the layers of sound. The wheels, the whistle, the occasional creak of wood and metal, the soft breathing from below. It's a strange kind of symphony, and slowly, almost without realizing it, your body begins to accept it. The tension in your shoulders is eased. Your grip on the edge of the berth loosens. Your thoughts become less structured, more fluid. Seep doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in. A moment here, a few seconds there. A brief drift, a quiet return. Each time, you sink a little deeper, the sounds of the train blending into the background rather than standing out. You're not fully comfortable. You're not entirely at rest. But you're closer than you were. And as the train continues its steady journey through the night, carrying you along its iron path, you find yourself suspended between wakefulness and sleep, rocked gently by motion, wrapped in the soft hum of a world that doesn't stop. Even as you try to, you don't quite wake up all at once. It's more like the train wakes you in pieces. First the sound, then the motion, then the slow realization that your neck has chosen a position that feels like it was negotiated poorly sometime in the night. You shift carefully, rediscovering your limbs one at a time. The berth creaks in quiet protest, reminding you that even small movements are public announcements in this wooden world. Below, your fellow passenger is already awake. You can tell by the subtle rustle of fabric and the faint clearing of a throat, the polite, restrained kind that says, "I am conscious, but let's not make a big deal of it." You glance down. He's sitting upright now, coat back on, posture composed. It's impressive, honestly. You, meanwhile, feel like you've been gently folded and stored overnight. "Morning," he says, with a nod that somehow conveys both greeting and acknowledgement of shared endurance. "Morning," you reply, your voice a little softer than expected, as if the night has taken something with it. You carefully descend from the upper berth, navigating the same footholds with slightly less confidence this time. The floor feels steadier than you remember. Either the train has smoothed out, or your body has simply adapted. The compartment has shifted again. The light filtering through the window is pale, early, and the gas lamp has been extinguished, leaving the space clearer, less shadowed. Outside, the world is no longer an abstract blur of darkness but a passing landscape. Fields stretching into the distance, dotted with trees and the occasional farmhouse. You take a moment to just look. There's something quietly remarkable about it. The way the train cuts through the countryside, connecting places that would otherwise feel impossibly far apart. In the 19th century, this kind of travel isn't just convenient, it's transformative. That's your mainstream historical fact here. Railways dramatically reshaped how people experience distance and time, turning journeys that once took days into hours and opening up entirely new patterns of movement, trade, and communication. You lean slightly toward the window, watching as a small cluster of buildings slides past. A station perhaps, or just a village close enough to the tracks to feel connected to them. Inside the carriage, the morning routine begins, not with any formal signal, but through a series of small synchronized actions. People shifting, stretching, adjusting clothing. A quiet choreography of waking. In the corridor, you hear footsteps again, more frequent now. Voices too, a little brighter than before, though still subdued. No one is fully ready for volume yet. Your fellow passenger reaches for a small bag and pulls out a cloth, using it to wipe his face and hands. Practical, efficient. You follow suit as best you can, using what you have to approximate a morning routine. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early sleeper trains didn't offer the kind of onboard bathrooms you're used to today, at least not in any modern sense. Facilities were limited, sometimes shared at the end of the carriage, and not always inviting. So many passengers relied on small personal items for basic hygiene, making do with water, cloths, and a strong sense of optimism. You glance toward the corridor, briefly considering a trip to explore those facilities, then decide maybe later, much later. The compartment door slides open again, and a different porter appears carrying a tray. "Tea?" he offers. Now that's something you understand. You nod, and he hands you a small cup, the liquid inside steaming gently. It's simple, probably not the finest blend, but right now it feels like a luxury. You take a sip. Warm, slightly bitter, grounding. It does what tea has always done best. It convinces you that you are in fact a functioning human being again. Your fellow passenger accepts one as well, lifting it in a small appreciative gesture before drinking. For a few moments, the two of you sit in companionable silence, watching the world pass by and letting the morning settle around you. Historians still argue whether these early sleeper journeys were seen as glamorous experiences or simply practical necessities, dressed up as innovation. Sitting here, sipping tea in a cramped compartment after a night of interrupted sleep, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. You finish your tea and set the cup aside, feeling a little more awake, a little more present. In the corridor, a conversation drifts past. Two voices discussing schedules, connections, the timing of arrival. There's a sense of anticipation now, subtle but growing. The journey isn't over, but it's no longer just about enduring the night. It's about what comes next. You stretch your arms carefully, mindful of the limited space. Your muscles respond with a quiet protest, reminding you that sleeping on a narrow berth is not exactly what they were designed for. Second joke of the night. Your body has officially filed a complaint with management, and unfortunately, management is a moving train with no customer service desk. Still, there's a strange satisfaction in it. You've done it. You've traveled through the night, adapted to the motion, the sounds, the space. You're part of the rhythm now, at least temporarily. The porter returns to begin reversing the transformation of the compartment. The upper berth is lifted and secured back into the wall, the lower bench restored to its original form. In a matter of moments, your bedroom disappears, replaced once again by a modest seating area. It's almost surreal, like the night itself has been folded away. You sit back down, the bench feeling both familiar and slightly disappointing after the illusion of a bed. But there's more room now, more space to breathe, to move. Outside, the landscape begins to change. The open fields give way to more frequent buildings, signs of approaching towns or cities. Smoke rises from chimneys, thin and steady against the morning sky. You watch as people go about their routines, figures in the distance, moving through their own lives, unaware of the train passing by or the small world it carries within it. There's something humbling about that. Your journey feels significant to you, but to the world outside, it's just another train, another day. A child passes by the compartment door, peeking in briefly before being gently guided along by a parent. Curiosity is universal, it seems, no matter the century. You catch your reflection faintly in the window, slightly rumpled, eyes a bit tired, but otherwise intact. Not bad, all things considered. Third joke of the night. You may not have slept well, but at least you didn't fall off the upper berth and become a cautionary tale for future passengers. The train begins to slow slightly, the rhythm of the wheels changing. It's subtle but noticeable, a shift from steady motion to something more measured. You glance at your fellow passenger who checks his pocket watch again. "Not long now," he says. You nod, feeling that quiet sense of transition again. The journey is nearing its next phase, the moment when movement gives way to arrival. And as the train continues forward, carrying you toward whatever waits at the end of this line, you sit there in the soft morning light, aware of how much has changed in just a single night, and how much remains exactly the same. The slowing of the train is gradual at first, almost polite, as if it doesn't want to interrupt the quiet rhythm you've settled into. Then it becomes more noticeable, the steady clatter softening, the sway easing, the entire carriage shifting from determined motion to something more reflective. You feel it before you fully register it. You're arriving somewhere. Outside the window, the landscape tightens. Fields give way to clustered buildings, dirt paths to more defined roads. Smoke thickens in the air, rising from chimneys in greater numbers, drifting across the tracks in thin grey ribbons. The world feels closer now, more populated, more immediate. Inside the carriage, the change is just as clear. Passengers begin gathering their belongings, movements more purposeful than before. Bags are lifted, coats adjusted, hats retrieved from hooks. The quiet intimacy of the night gives way to a shared readiness, everyone preparing to step back into their separate lives. Your fellow passenger stands, smoothing his coat with a practiced motion. "First time?" he asks again, though this time there's a hint of conclusion in it. You nod. "Feels like it lasted longer than a night." He smiles faintly. "That's the train for you. Stretches time when you need it, and shortens it when you don't." You're not entirely sure what that means, but it sounds right. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Major railway stations in the 19th century quickly became bustling centres of urban life, gateways that connected cities, facilitated trade, and transformed how people arrived and departed. For many, stepping off a train wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of something else entirely. The train slows further, the wheels now producing a softer, more measured rhythm. You can hear the faint squeal of metal against metal, the subtle resistance as momentum is gently negotiated into stillness. You gather your things, such as they are, and take one last look around the compartment. It's back to its original form, the temporary bedroom erased without a trace. If you hadn't experienced it, you might not believe it ever existed. There's something oddly poetic about that. In the corridor, people begin to queue, forming a loose line toward the exit. There's no rush, exactly, but there's a shared understanding that everyone will be leaving soon. You step out into the narrow passage, joining the slow movement forward. The air here feels different, cooler, carrying hints of the outside world seeping in through small gaps and open doors further ahead. A man behind you adjusts a hat that seems determined not to cooperate. A woman ahead clutches a small bag, her expression somewhere between relief and anticipation. Everyone is in their own moment, their own quiet transition. Historians still argue whether the experience of train travel in this era fostered a sense of shared identity among passengers or reinforced the separations they carried with them. Standing here, shoulder to shoulder with strangers you've spent the night near but not truly with, you can feel both at once. The train gives one final, gentle lurch. And then it stops, not abruptly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, definitive stillness, the kind that feels almost unfamiliar after hours of motion. For a moment, no one moves. Then the door at the end of the carriage opens, and a rush of sound and light pours in. Voices, footsteps, the distant call of porters, the echo of activity bouncing off station walls. You step forward with the others, descending the narrow steps back onto solid ground. The platform feels strange beneath your feet. Too still, too steady, as if the world has paused while you've been in motion. You take a breath, the air is different here. Less enclosed, more open, carrying the layered scents of the station. Coal smoke, damp stone, something faintly metallic. It's busy, alive in a way that contrasts sharply with the contained world you've just left. Second joke of the night. After hours of being gently shaken like a Victorian cocktail, standing still now feels suspiciously like a glitch in reality. You step aside, letting others pass, and turn to look back at the train. It's quieter now, the great machine at rest. Steam still curls from its engine, but the urgency is gone. It looks almost patient, as if waiting for the next set of passengers, the next journey, the next night of shared motion and restless sleep. Porters move quickly along the platform, unloading luggage, calling out destinations. Travelers reunite with waiting friends or family, their greetings a mix of relief and excitement. Others move on alone, disappearing into the flow of the station. You spot your fellow passenger stepping away, blending into the crowd with the ease of someone who has done this many times before. He doesn't look back, and somehow, that feels appropriate. Your time in that small shared space is over, but it lingers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some early sleeper train passengers reported feeling disoriented after disembarking, not just from the physical motion, but from the sudden shift in environment. Going from a confined, constantly moving space to a wide, stationary one. Standing here now, you understand exactly what they meant. You adjust your stance, letting your body recalibrate. The ground is steady, but your senses are still catching up. Around you, the station continues its rhythm. Arrivals, departures, the endless cycle of movement and pause. It's a place of intersections, where countless journeys overlap without ever fully connecting. You take a few steps forward, then pause again. There's a part of you that wants to hold on to the feeling of the train, the motion, the sounds, the strange comfort of being carried through the night. It was imperfect, uncomfortable at times, but undeniably unique, and now it's already becoming a memory. Third joke of the night. You survived a 19th century sleeper train without falling off the bunk, losing your belongings, or starting a dramatic monologue about the injustice of thin mattresses. Honestly, that's a win. You exhale, letting the moment settle. The journey is over, but not really. It's just changed form, shifted from motion to stillness, from shared space to individual path. You turn away from the train and step into the flow of the station, carrying with you the quiet imprint of the night, the rhythm of wheels, the sway of the carriage, the soft, persistent hum of a world that never quite stops moving. And as you move forward, blending into the morning crowd, you realize that somewhere, not too far away, another train is already preparing to depart. Another set of passengers about to climb aboard, to settle into narrow berths, to listen to the same steady rhythm and wonder just for a moment how something so simple could feel so vast. The slow process of doing laundry in the 1800s. You start before the sun has properly made up its mind about rising, because laundry day is not something you squeeze between errands. It is the entire day, possibly your entire personality for the next 12 hours. The air is still cool, damp with morning fog, and you already feel behind that pile of clothes waiting for you isn't just laundry. It's a quiet accusation. You begin by sorting, not casually, not with a half-hearted glance like you might today, but with the seriousness of someone handling fragile diplomacy. Linen here, wool there, delicate garments. If anything can be called delicate after weeks of wear, set aside. White pieces must stay separate, because once colours bleed, they don't politely apologize. They ruin everything. You know this because it has happened before, and someone definitely brought it up for weeks afterward. Laundry in the 1800s isn't frequent. That's your first major realization as you stare at the heap. People don't wash clothes daily or even weekly in the modern sense. Instead, there's a designated wash day, often once a week or even less often, depending on resources, which means everything has had time to mature. Let's call it that. The fabrics hold on to the past, sweet soot, kitchen smoke, and whatever mystery substance ended up on that sleeve last Thursday. You pick up a shirt and give it a sniff. Immediate regret. That was a bold move and it backfired. Now comes the hauling. Water doesn't magically appear in your home. There's no faucet, no comforting hum of plumbing. You grab buckets, heavy, awkward, slightly splintery, and head toward the nearest well, pump, or stream. If it's winter, congratulations, the water is freezing. If it's summer, congratulations, you still have to carry it uphill. Each step reminds you that gravity is not your friend. The buckets slosh, threatening to baptize your shoes with every careless tilt. By the time you return, your arms already ache, and you haven't even started washing. You pause, briefly considering whether society might survive if everyone simply stopped wearing clothes altogether. It's a fleeting thought. You continue. Historians generally agree that this water hauling alone could take up a significant portion of the day, especially in rural areas. Some households require dozens of gallons just to get through a single wash cycle. If cycle can even be used here without irony. Back inside or near your washing area, you begin the soaking phase. This is where patience becomes less of a virtue and more of a requirement forced upon you by physics. You fill large tubs, wooden, often slightly warped, and submerge the garments. The water darkens almost immediately, as though the clothes have been waiting for this moment to confess their sins. But soaking isn't just about loosening dirt. You might add lye soap, a harsh, homemade substance created from wood ash and animal fat. Yes, the same lye that can irritate skin and, if mishandled, cause burns. You dip your hands in anyway because gloves are a luxury and your hands are now part of the system. There's a faint, sharp smell, alkaline, almost biting. It clings to your nose, your fingers, your thoughts. You stir the garments gently at first, then more firmly, ensuring every piece is thoroughly saturated. This isn't a quick dip-and-done situation. Clothes can soak for hours, sometimes overnight, depending on how stubborn the grime feels that day. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some households used stale urine as a cleaning agent. Yes, really. The ammonia content made it effective at breaking down grease and stains. So if you're wondering whether laundry day could get any more glamorous, the answer is a confident no. You glance at the soaking tub and try not to think too hard about that. While the clothes sit, you don't exactly relax. There's always something else to prepare. You might gather more firewood because the next stage, boiling, demands heat and lots of it. You stack logs, coax flames to life, and position a large iron pot or copper kettle above the fire. The crackling sound is oddly comforting, like a preview of the effort still to come. The rhythm of the day settles in. Haul, soak, stir, prepare. Your movements become automatic, almost meditative. If meditation involved constant manual labor and occasional existential sighing, you notice the textures as you work. The roughness of wool, the smoother, tighter weave of linen, the way heavier fabrics resist movement even when wet. Water drips from your sleeves, making your clothes feel heavier with each passing minute. You are, quite literally, becoming part of the laundry. There's also the quiet social aspect. In many communities, laundry wasn't always a solitary task. Women, because it was overwhelmingly women, often gathered to wash together, turning the labor into a shared experience. Conversations flowed alongside the water. News traveled. Complaints were aired, sometimes as loudly as the clothes were beaten later on. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were primarily social relief or simply a practical necessity disguised as community bonding. Either way, you can imagine the mix of laughter and groans echoing across a washing yard. You pause for a moment, stretching your back. The day hasn't even reached its midpoint, and already your muscles are negotiating terms. You glance at the soaking clothes again. They look heavier now, somehow more demanding, as if they've absorbed not just water but expectations. There's no turning back. Laundry day has momentum, and you are firmly caught in its current. You reach into the tub and lift a garment. Water pours off it in steady streams, splashing back into the basin. It feels twice as heavy as before. You give it a small squeeze, testing. Not yet. It needs more time. Of course it does. So you wait, not idly, but in that peculiar way where your body rests while your mind keeps ticking through tasks. You adjust the fire, check the water level, maybe rearrange the sorted piles for the third time, because organization feels like progress. A faint breeze drifts through, carrying the scent of damp fabric and wood smoke. It's not unpleasant exactly, just persistent. You think about how in the future people will complain about pressing a button and waiting an hour for clean clothes. You almost laugh. Almost instead, you roll up your sleeves again, dip your hands back into the cool, slightly murky water, and keep going. Because this is only the beginning, and the real work, the boiling, the beating, the relentless scrubbing, is still waiting patiently, like a sequel no one asked for, but everyone has to endure. The sun climbs higher, and with it, the quiet understanding that you are in this for the long haul. The soaking water has done what it can, which is to say, not enough. You lift the first garment from the tub, and it resists you like it has opinions. It drips steadily, leaving a trail behind as you carry it toward the fire. This is where things escalate. From passive waiting to active confrontation, the kettle is already steaming. Thanks to the fire you've been feeding like a small, hungry beast. You don't just warm the clothes, you boil them. That's the goal. High heat helps loosen dirt, kill odors, and deal with things you'd rather not identify too closely. You lower the garment into the hot water with a stick or wooden paddle, because your hands, brave as they are not interested in being cooked. A hiss rises as the fabric meets the water. Steam curls upward, wrapping around your face, dampening your hairline. It's like standing inside a very aggressive cloud. You stir slowly, pushing the clothes deeper, making sure everything gets its turn in the bubbling heat. Boiling laundry was a common practice in many households, especially for linens and undergarments. It wasn't just about cleanliness, it was also about sanitation. Without modern detergents or disinfectants, heat did the heavy lifting. You might not know the word bacteria, but you understand that boiling makes things safer. Still, the process isn't exactly gentle. Fabrics can weaken over time, colors can fade, and anything fragile is already long gone by this stage. Survival of the sturdiest, you keep stirring, using that paddle like you're brewing a potion, which, in a way you are, just less magical and more exhausting. The smell intensifies now, hot water, soap, and the lingering essence of whatever these clothes have been through. It's not pleasant, but it's oddly satisfying in a something is happening kind of way. After a while, you hook a piece out and inspect it. It's cleaner, yes, but not finished, not even close. That's when the next phase begins. The one that truly tests your patience and your upper body strength. You move to the washboard or a flat stone, depending on what's available. The surface is ridged or rough, designed to help you scrub out dirt by force. You lay the garment across it, grab your bar of soap, still that harsh homemade lye mixture, and start working back and forth. Press, drag, repeat. The sound is unmistakable. A rhythmic scrape, fabric against wood or stone, punctuated by the occasional splash. Your arms quickly fall into a pattern, muscles tightening, relaxing, tightening again. It's almost like rowing, except you're not going anywhere. You focus on the worst spots first, collars. These are the battlefield zones, where dirt has dug in and refuses to surrender. You scrub harder, adding more soap, leaning your weight into it. The fabric bunches, twists, pushes back. It's a quiet struggle, but a real one. Here's a historical detail that might make you feel slightly better. This kind of manual scrubbing was so demanding that it was often considered one of the hardest household tasks. Laundry day wasn't just inconvenient. It was physically taxing to the point that some households hired washerwomen if they could afford it. These professionals did this all day for multiple families. Imagine signing up for that as a career. Bold. Now, if scrubbing isn't enough, and sometimes it isn't, you escalate again. You take the garment and begin to beat it. Literally, there might be a wooden paddle, a stick, or just a sturdy surface. You lift the wet cloth and bring it down with a firm slap. Then again. Each strike sends droplets flying, catching the light like tiny, rebellious sparks. It's not anger exactly, it's technique. The impact helps loosen embedded dirt, forcing it out of the fibers. But it does feel a little personal sometimes. especially when that one stubborn stain refuses to cooperate. You know the one. It's been judging you since last week. You pause, breathing a bit heavier now. Your shoulders are starting to complain, quietly at first, then more insistently. You ignore them. There's no shortcut here, no quick wash setting. Just you, the fabric, and a growing understanding of why people didn't own excessive wardrobes. A light joke crosses your mind. If clothes had feelings, they'd probably file a formal complaint about this treatment. Then again, they started it. Between scrubbing and beating, you rinse the soap off occasionally in a smaller basin or bucket. Not a full rinse, that comes later, but enough to check your progress. The water clouds again, carrying away bits of dirt and soap. You hold the fabric up, squint slightly, and decide whether it's acceptable or needs another round. Usually, it needs another round. And then there's the matter of soap itself. That lye-based mixture isn't just harsh on dirt, it's harsh on you. Your hands feel it now. Dry, slightly raw, maybe even tingling. Over time, repeated exposure could cause cracking or irritation. But you keep going, because stopping isn't an option unless you're willing to wear yesterday's problems again tomorrow. Here's a quirky detail that floats through your mind as you work. Some people believe that certain charms or rituals could improve washing results. A specific stirring pattern, a whispered phrase, or even washing on a particular day of the week. Whether it helped or not is debatable. But when you're this deep into the process, a little superstition starts to sound reasonable. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were taken seriously or just part of the cultural background noise of daily life. Either way, you briefly consider inventing your own laundry charm. Something simple, something like, "Please just be clean already." You try it. No immediate results. Worth a shot. The pile beside you slowly shifts from to be washed to washed but not done, which feels like a small victory. Each finished piece joins a growing stack that still needs rinsing, wringing, and drying. It's progress, but the kind that comes with fine print. Time stretches. The sun is higher now, warming your back, drying the edges of your sleeves before they get soaked again. Your movements become more efficient, less hesitant. You find a rhythm. Not exactly enjoyable, but manageable scrub. Beat, rinse, inspect, repeat. You start to notice small differences between fabrics. Linen responds a bit more cooperatively, wool less so. Heavier items demand more effort. Lighter ones almost trick you into thinking, this might be easy. Until you remember, there are dozens more waiting. At some point, you lose track of how many garments you've worked through. Counting feels unnecessary, maybe even dangerous. Better to focus on the next piece, and the next and the next. There's a moment, brief but real, where you pause and look at your hands. They're damp, slightly wrinkled, marked by the work. And yet, there's a sense of accomplishment building beneath the fatigue. You're taking something worn, soiled, and turning it into something usable again. It's slow, it's relentless, but it matters. You pick up another garment, heavier than the last, and set it on the washboard. The ridges wait patiently, like they've been doing this forever. You take a breath, not dramatic, just enough, and press the fabric down, back and forth. Press, drag, repeat. The rhythm continues, steady as the day itself, carrying you forward into the next phase whether you're ready or not. By now, you've accepted something important. The clothes are cleaner, yes, but they are also heavier than ever, as if they've absorbed not just water but a stubborn refusal to cooperate. You gather the scrubbed pile, each piece dripping with the combined effort of boiling, beating and scrubbing, and prepare for what might quietly be the most deceptive part of the entire ordeal. Rinsing sounds gentle. It is not. You carry the first armful toward fresh water, either another tub you've filled, again with those same protesting buckets, or a nearby stream if you're lucky enough to have one. If it's a stream, the water rushes past with a kind of indifference that feels personal. You kneel or crouch, dipping the fabric in, watching the current tug at it, like it's trying to steal your progress. You hold on tighter. The goal here is simple in theory. Remove all the soap and loosened dirt. In practice, it becomes a repetitive, arm-numbing cycle. You plunge the garment into the water, lift it, squeeze lightly, then plunge again. The water clouds at first, turning faintly grey, then gradually clears as the soap dissolves away. This isn't a one-and-done rinse. Oh no, you repeat this several times. Sometimes you even change the water entirely if it gets too murky. which means yes, more hauling, more buckets, more conversations with gravity that you definitely lose. A well-documented historical fact. Rinsing often required multiple stages of water, sometimes 3 or more, especially for larger households. Cleanliness wasn't just visual, it was tactile. If the fabric still felt slick or sticky, it wasn't done. Simple as that. You test this by rubbing the cloth between your fingers. If it squeaks slightly, that's a good sign. If it feels like it's quietly judging you, back into the water it goes. The soundscape shifts here. Instead of scraping and slapping, you hear splashing, sloshing, the steady rhythm of water meeting fabric. It's almost calming, almost, until your arms remind you they've been working since sunrise and would like to file a formal complaint. Now comes the part that separates the determined from the truly stubborn. Wringing. You take a rinsed garment, hold one end in each hand and twist. Hard water streams out in thin, relentless lines, dripping onto the ground or back into the basin. You twist further, your wrists rotating, forearms tightening. The fabric resists at first, then yields, releasing more water with each turn. It feels like wrestling something that refuses to admit defeat. You reverse the twist, then twist again in the opposite direction, just to be thorough. Because if you don't remove enough water now, you'll pay for it later when drying takes forever and a day. For larger items, sheets, blankets, you might need help. 2 people, each gripping an end, twisting in opposite directions like you're trying to wring out the entire concept of moisture. It's almost comical, in a this is definitely a full-body workout kind of way. And here's a quirky detail. In some regions, specialized wringing devices began appearing in the late 19th century. Simple rollers you could crank to squeeze water out. Early versions of what would eventually evolve into washing machines. But for now, it's just you and your wrists, doing their best impression of mechanical engineering. Historians still argue whether these early devices were widely adopted or remained limited to wealthier households for quite some time. Either way, you don't have one. Of course you don't. So you keep twisting. Your hands ache now, a deep, persistent soreness that settles into your joints. The skin feels tight from the soap, the water, the constant friction. You flex your fingers briefly, then move on to the next piece. There's a quiet efficiency to it. You've stopped overthinking. You just do. Twist. Drip. Twist again. You notice how the weight changes. A freshly rinsed garment is heavy, almost unwieldy. After wringing, it becomes manageable, still damp, but no longer dragging you down. It's a small victory repeated dozens of times. At some point, you line the wrung clothes in a basket or over a railing, preparing them for the final stage. They look better now. Visibly cleaner, lighter in colour, less haunted. You might even feel a flicker of satisfaction. Don't get too comfortable. There's still more. You pause briefly, stretching your back, which has decided to become very vocal about its existence. The sun is now high, casting sharper shadows. Time has moved forward whether you noticed or not, and you're deep into the second half of the day. A breeze picks up, brushing against your damp sleeves. It's cool, refreshing, and immediately makes you aware of just how wet you are. Not soaked exactly, but definitely part of the laundry ecosystem at this point. You pick up another garment and begin the rinse-wring cycle again. There's a rhythm to it now, almost hypnotic. Dip, lift, squeeze, twist, repeat. Your mind starts to wander slightly, drifting between the task at hand and random thoughts that pop up uninvited. Like whether anyone anywhere has ever genuinely enjoyed this process. The answer feels like a confident no. But there is something quietly satisfying about the transformation. You started with a pile of worn, soiled fabric, and now you're holding something clean. Well, cleaner. It's tangible progress, earned through effort you can feel in every muscle. You remember hearing that some washerwomen could process astonishing amounts of laundry in a single day, their movements honed by repetition and necessity. It's both impressive and slightly intimidating. You glance at your remaining pile and decide not to compare. A light joke crosses your mind. If this were a modern fitness program, it would be called Laundry Fit, and people would pay to avoid it. You almost laugh. Almost instead. You keep going. The ground around you is damp now, marked by countless drips and splashes. Your shoes, if you're wearing any, are questionable in terms of dryness. The air carries that familiar mix of soap, water, and effort. It's not unpleasant anymore. Just normal. You finish another piece, wring it thoroughly, and add it to the growing line of almost done. The pile shrinks, slowly but surely. Each garment is a small step toward the end of the day, even if that end still feels distant. And then there's that one item, the stubborn one. The one that seemed fine during scrubbing but now reveals a faint stain under the light. You stare at it. It stares back metaphorically. You consider your options. Back to scrubbing? Possibly. Ignore it? Tempting. You sigh, dip it back into the water and give it another round. Because of course you do. Laundry in the 1800s doesn't reward shortcuts, it notices them. It remembers. Historians still argue whether people were as meticulous about stain removal as we imagine, or if practicality sometimes won over perfection. Standing here, arms aching, you understand the appeal of good enough, but you also know that someone, maybe you, maybe someone else, will notice later, so you scrub. Briefly, firmly, then rinse again. The cycle continues, but the end is in sight now. The basket of wrung clothes grows, each piece ready for drying, for finishing, for that final stretch of effort that will somehow take longer than expected. You straighten up, take a breath, and gather the last few garments. The hardest physical work is nearly behind you. You just have to get everything dry, smooth and presentable. Easy, right? You almost smile at that thought, almost. You look at the basket of wrung clothes and feel a cautious sense of progress. Everything is cleaner, lighter, no longer dripping like a defeated opponent. And yet the day is not done with you, not even close, because now comes the slow, patient art of drying, where time itself becomes part of the labor. You carry the damp garments outside, or to whatever space you have that welcomes air and light. A yard, a line strung between posts, a hedge, a rooftop. Anything that can hold fabric and invite the breeze to do its quiet work. You begin hanging each piece carefully, because how you place them matters more than you'd think. Shirts are shaken out first. A firm snap of the wrist sends tiny droplets flying, catching sunlight like glitter you definitely didn't ask for. The fabric stretches slightly, easing out some wrinkles before they settle in permanently. You drape it over the line, smoothing it with your hands, aligning seams like you're negotiating a truce between cloth and gravity. Heavier items take more effort. Sheets feel endless, like they've grown since you last handled them. You hoist them up, arms reaching, shoulders reminding you they've been on duty all day. The fabric flaps briefly in the breeze, then settles, hanging in long, quiet folds. This is where nature becomes your reluctant assistant. Sunlight helps bleach and freshen the fabric, an early natural form of whitening that people relied on long before chemical bleachers became common. A mainstream historical detail, sun bleaching was especially important for linens, which could be laid out on grass for hours or even days to achieve that coveted pale brightness. Yes, days. Because sometimes drying doesn't happen in a single afternoon. Weather has opinion, and it doesn't always align with your schedule. You step back and look at the line. It's a small victory, rows of clean garments swaying gently, like flags of effort. The breeze moves through them, carrying that faint, clean scent that feels almost like a reward. Almost, because now you wait. And waiting in this context is not restful. You keep an eye on the sky, because clouds can gather with suspicious speed. Rain is not just inconvenient, it's catastrophic. Wet clothes becoming wet again is the kind of plot twist no one enjoys. You glance upward. The sky looks stable. For now, a quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. In some places, people believed that drying clothes outdoors overnight could expose them to harmful spirits, or night air that made them unhealthy. Whether that was superstition or an early understanding of dampness and illness is still up for debate. Either way, you're not eager to test it. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in practical health concerns or simply folklore layered onto daily chores. Standing here, watching your clothes sway, you decide it doesn't matter. You just want them dry before anything, spiritual or meteorological, interferes. As the hours pass, you check the garments periodically. You touch the fabric, feeling for dampness. Some pieces dry quickly, especially lighter linen. Others, thicker fabrics, layered items, take their time holding on to moisture like it's a personal grudge. You flip them occasionally, repositioning for better airflow. It's a small detail, but it makes a difference. Everything about this process is incremental, built on small adjustments and quiet persistence. Eventually, one by one, the clothes reach that satisfying state, dry but not brittle. You take them down carefully, folding or stacking them as you go. And just when you think you're done, the next phase steps in with a calm, almost smug presence. Starching because clean isn't enough. Clothes must also hold their shape, especially for more formal or structured garments. You prepare a starch mixture, often made from boiled starches like wheat, rice, or potatoes. It's a cloudy liquid, slightly thick, with a texture that promises stiffness. You dip collars, cuffs, or entire garments into the mixture, then gently squeeze out the excess. Not wringing this time, just enough to remove drips while leaving the starch embedded in the fibers. It feels different from water, slightly slick, slightly heavier. Once starched, the garments may need to dry again. Of course they do. You hang them back up or lay them out, repeating the waiting game. By now, patience isn't a virtue. It's a survival skill. When everything is finally dry, truly dry, you move to the finishing stage. This is where you bring order back to the chaos of fabric, ironing. You heat a heavy iron, often made of solid metal, by placing it near or directly in the fire. There's no temperature dial, no gentle steam setting. Just heat, guessed and tested. Too cool and it does nothing, too hot and you risk scorching the fabric, leaving marks that no amount of effort can undo. You test it carefully, maybe by hovering your hand near the surface or touching it briefly to a scrap of cloth. Satisfied, or at least hopeful, you begin. You lay a garment flat on a table or board, smoothing it out. The iron presses down, gliding slowly, releasing faint wisps of heat. There's a soft, almost soothing sound as it moves, flattening wrinkles, setting the starch, bringing a crispness that feels like the final signature on a long document. You work methodically. Sleeves, collars, seams. Each section gets attention because wrinkles don't politely disappear on their own. They require negotiation, pressure, and time. Here's a historical note. Ironing was often done with multiple irons, heating one while using another, rotating them to maintain consistent heat. It was a careful balance. Too much time away from the fire and the iron cooled. Too much time in it and it became dangerously hot. You can feel the fatigue now, deeper than before. It's not just physical, it's cumulative. A full day of effort settling into your bones. And yet, there's something undeniably satisfying about this stage. You're taking the last rough edges and smoothing them out, turning effort into something visible, a light joke surfaces. After all this, you half expect the clothes to thank you. They do not. Ingratitude is apparently timeless. You continue, piece by piece. The pile transforms. Wrinkled becomes smooth, damp becomes crisp, disorder becomes order. You stack the finished garments neatly, each one a small testament to the day's work. At last you step back. The baskets are full again, but differently now. Not with tasks waiting to be done, but with tasks completed. Clean, dried, starched, pressed. You did that. Laundry in the 1800s wasn't just a chore. It was an endurance event, a test of patience, strength, and persistence. It demanded a full day, sometimes more, and left little room for shortcuts. As the light begins to soften and the day winds down, you feel it. That quiet, earned exhaustion. The kind that settles in your shoulders and hands, but also carries a hint of satisfaction. You glance at the neatly stacked clothes one more time. Tomorrow they'll be worn again. Eventually they'll return to this cycle. But not today. Today you're done. And that, more than anything, feels like a victory. What a trip to the apothecary was like in medieval times. You push open a narrow wooden door that resists at first, as if the building itself is deciding whether you're worth letting in. It finally gives with a soft creak, and you step into a space that feels immediately different from the street outside. Quieter, dimmer and thick, with a scent that is equal parts earthy, sweet and faintly unsettling. The first thing you notice is the smell. It's not unpleasant, exactly. Just layered. Dried herbs hang in bundles from the ceiling beams, brushing gently against one another whenever a draft slips through the cracks. Lavender, rosemary, something bitter you can't quite place, and underneath it all, a sharper note. Vinegar, perhaps. Or something medicinal that makes your nose twitch in cautious curiosity. Your boots tap softly against the wooden floor as you step further in, the light shifting around you. It comes mostly from a small window and a few candles placed strategically along shelves that line the walls from floor to ceiling. And those shelves, well, they're the real show. Rows upon rows of jars, bottles and containers, each one holding something that looks like it belongs in either a remedy or a warning label. Powders in muted shades of grey and brown. Liquids that catch the candlelight in strange ways. Amber green, a cloudy white that feels like it shouldn't exist outside of a laboratory you definitely didn't sign up to enter. You pause, taking it all in. This is where people come to get better, or at least to try. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, apothecaries were among the primary providers of medicine, preparing and selling remedies made from plants, minerals, and animal products. They weren't quite doctors, but they were essential figures in everyday healthcare. Part pharmacist, part herbalist, part "we'll see if this works." You move a little closer to the nearest shelf, curiosity pulling you in despite your better judgment. One jar catches your eye. Inside, something that looks suspiciously like dried petals. It's hard to tell. A small handwritten label is tied around the neck with string. The ink faded but still legible if you lean in. You do, and immediately regret it just a little. Because now you've committed to engaging with whatever this is. The label reads something in Latin, because of course it does. And while you can't fully translate it, you recognize enough to guess it's meant for calming something. Nerves, perhaps, or digestion, or existential dread. Medieval remedies often aim broadly. A faint sound behind the counter makes you straighten. The apothecary is there. You hadn't noticed them at first, partially hidden behind a stack of books and jars. But now they rise into view. Someone whose entire presence feels like it belongs exactly in this space. Their clothing is practical, slightly worn, with sleeves rolled just enough to reveal hands stained faintly by herbs and powders. They look at you, not with surprise, but with quiet assessment. You are, after all, a walking collection of symptoms waiting to be interpreted. You offer a small nod, because that seems like the safest opening move in a place where everything could either heal you or accidentally turn you into a cautionary tale. They return the nod, then gesture subtly toward the interior of the shop. An invitation. You step further in, the air growing thicker with each movement. It's warmer here, the kind of warmth that comes from enclosed space, candlelight, and the slow, steady work of mixing and preparing. On a central table, a mortar and pestle sit mid-use, traces of crushed leaves clinging to the sides. Nearby, a small scale balances delicate weights against what looks like a pinch of powdered something. Precision matters here, even if the science behind it is still evolving. Second joke of the night. This is essentially a medieval pharmacy, except instead of standardized dosages, you get a pinch, a handful, and we'll see how it goes. You glance around again, noticing details you missed before. Small drawers tucked beneath the shelves, each labeled in careful script. Bundles of roots hanging upside down, their shapes twisted and irregular. A glass vessel filled with a liquid that has settled into layers, like it can't quite decide what it wants to be. There's a quiet rhythm to the space, not silent but hushed. The soft scrape of the pestle, the faint crackle of a candle, the subtle shift of dried herbs brushing against one another. It's almost calming, because then you notice a jar containing something that looks very much like a preserved animal part. You don't stare. You absolutely do not stare. You simply acknowledge its existence and move on with your dignity intact. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval apothecaries didn't just use plants. They often included animal-derived ingredients in their remedies, from ground shells to more unusual components like dried organs or even powdered insects. So if your modern medicine ever feels strange, just remember, it could be significantly more adventurous. You take a slow breath, letting the scent of herbs settle again, pushing that particular observation gently to the back of your mind. The apothecary steps closer now, their movements deliberate and unhurried. They don't speak immediately, which somehow makes the moment feel more important. You realize something. There's no quick transaction here, no next in line. This is a process, a conversation, a kind of quiet negotiation between your condition and their understanding of the world. Historians still argue whether medieval apothecaries were primarily effective healers or simply providers of comfort in a time with limited medical knowledge. Standing here, surrounded by carefully arranged remedies and centuries of accumulated belief, you can see both sides. There's knowledge here, real, observed, passed down. But there's also guesswork, tradition, and a fair amount of hope. You shift your weight slightly, aware now that you're expected to say something. to explain why you've come, but for a moment you don't. Instead, you let yourself exist in this space, a place where illness is approached not with machines or scans, but with senses, intuition, and a collection of ingredients that blur the line between science and story. The apothecary watches you, patient, and you realize that in this moment, before any remedy is chosen, before any mixture is prepared, you're standing at the beginning of something uncertain, but deeply human, a search for relief, a trust in someone else's knowledge, and maybe, just maybe, a willingness to drink something that looks slightly questionable if it means feeling a little better. You glance once more at the shelves, at the jars and bundles and carefully labelled mysteries. Then you turn back to the apothecary, ready to speak. Your voice feels a little too loud at first, like you've interrupted something older than you. You lower it instinctively, describing your symptoms in simple terms, nothing too dramatic, just enough to justify your presence, without sounding like you're about to collapse onto the floor. The apothecary listens without interruption, not just hearing you, studying you. Their eyes move between your face, your posture, the way you hold your shoulders, even how you breathe between sentences. It's not uncomfortable exactly, but it is thorough. You get the sense that in this moment you are less a person and more a puzzle waiting to be interpreted. They nod once, slowly, as if confirming something only they can see. Then they turn. No explanation, no dramatic declaration, just a quiet pivot toward the shelves, where their hands begin to move with practiced familiarity. You watch closely. This is where things get interesting. They reach for a jar filled with dried leaves, dark, curled, slightly brittle looking, and measure out a small amount into the mortar. Then another container, this one holding something powdered, pale and fine like dust. A pinch of that joins the mix. The pestle comes down with a soft rhythmic pressure. Crush, turn, press. There's something almost hypnotic about it. The steady motion, the faint release of scent as the ingredients break down further, blending into something new. You catch hints of bitterness, a sharp herbal note, and something faintly sweet underneath it all. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine was heavily influenced by the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, with illness believed to result from imbalances among them. Treatments, including those from apothecaries, aimed to restore that balance, often by using herbs and substances thought to have opposing qualities. You glance at the mixture in the mortar, wondering which of your internal humours is currently being negotiated. Hopefully not all of them at once. The apothecary pauses, inspects the texture, then adds a few drops of liquid from a small glass vial. The scent sharpens immediately, rising in a way that makes your eyes narrow slightly. It's strong, vinegar-based perhaps, or infused with something equally assertive. Second joke of the night. You came in expecting something like a tablet and a glass of water, and instead you're watching someone casually assemble what feels like a medieval potion straight out of a fantasy game. Except this one has consequences. The mixture is stirred again, slowly this time, until it reaches a consistency that seems to satisfy some internal standard. Then it's transferred into a small container, a stoppered bottle that looks just sturdy enough to survive travel, but not necessarily your trust. The apothecary finally turns back to you, holding the bottle up slightly. They speak now, voice calm and measured, explaining how and when to take it. The instructions are simple but precise. A small amount, taken at certain time, possibly with water or ale depending on availability and mood. You nod, committing it to memory. There's no printed label, no dosage chart. Just you, your recollection, and the hope that you don't accidentally double the amount and discover a side effect no one wrote down. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval remedies included ingredients like honey, wine, or spices not just for their perceived medicinal properties, but also to improve taste. Because even in the Middle Ages, people knew that if something tastes terrible, you're less likely to keep taking it. You eye the bottle again, wondering how much effort went into making this drinkable. The apothecary isn't done yet. They turn once more to the shelves, selecting a second item, this one already prepared. A small pouch filled with dried herbs, tied neatly with string. This, they explain, to be steeped. Tea, essentially, medieval style. You take it, feeling the texture through the fabric. Light, slightly crumbly, carrying that same layered scent as the rest of the shop. You now have options: a liquid remedy and an herbal infusion. A full experience. Historians still argue whether these treatments were genuinely effective, or if much of their benefit came from placebo effects and the natural course of illness. Standing here, holding a bottle and a pouch that represent both centuries of tradition and a fair amount of uncertainty, you can understand why the debate continues. You reach into your pocket, or whatever passes for one in this era, and produce payment. Coins, slightly worn, exchanged without much discussion. The value is understood, even if the outcome isn't guaranteed. The apothecary accepts them with a small nod, tucking them away with the same quiet efficiency they've shown throughout. For a moment you both stand there, donations complete, but it doesn't feel transactional. It feels more personal than that, as if you've been seen, assessed, and given something tailored specifically to you, even if the tailoring is based on a system that includes things like too much heat or insufficient moisture in your temperament. Third joke of the night. Somewhere deep inside your body, your humors are apparently having a team meeting, and this bottle is the official agenda. You carefully secure the items you've been given, making sure the stopper is tight, the pouch intact. The last thing you want is to accidentally redecorate your belongings with medicinal mystery. Around you, the shop remains as it was, quiet, steady, filled with its collection of remedies waiting for the next person to walk through that door. You take a final look at the shelves, noticing details you missed before. The way certain jars are grouped together, perhaps by use or origin. The small notes tied to some containers, more detailed than others. It's not random. It's a system. Even if it's one you don't fully understand, there's knowledge here. Not perfect, not complete, but real in its own way. You turn back to the apothecary, offering a small nod of thanks. They return it, already beginning to shift their attention elsewhere. To the mortar, the shelves, the next task waiting to be done. Your presence here was a moment. Now it's passing. You step toward the door, the familiar creak greeting you again as you open it. The outside air feels different now. Cooler, lighter, less dense than the herb-filled atmosphere you're leaving behind. But you carry a piece of that space with you. In your hands, in the faint scent clinging to your clothes, in the quiet awareness that somewhere behind you, remedies are still being mixed, still being trusted. You pause just outside, glancing down at the bottle once more. It doesn't look particularly impressive. But then again, neither do most things that end up mattering. You tuck it safely away, adjusting your grip on the small pouch, and take a step forward, back into the world beyond the apothecary, where the real test of these remedies is about to begin. The street outside feels louder than you remember, as if your ears need a moment to readjust after the hushed, herb-heavy quiet of the shop. Voices drift past, carts creak over uneven ground, and somewhere nearby a vendor calls out with the steady confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're selling, even if no one else does. You step carefully, one hand still hovering near the bottle tucked safely away, as though it might attempt an escape. The small pouch of herbs rests lightly in your grip, its scent following you like a faint reminder of where you've just been. There's a strange shift in your mindset now. Before, you were just someone walking into a shop. Now, you're someone carrying a remedy, which somehow feels more serious, even if you're not entirely sure what it will do. You find a quieter spot along the street, a low stone ledge near a wall where the bustle softens just enough to think. It seems like a reasonable place to attempt your first dose. Not too public, not too hidden, a nice middle ground between responsible and slightly experimental. You take out the bottle. It looks the same as before, of course, but now it carries weight, expectation, maybe even a bit of nervous curiosity. You turn it slowly in your hand, watching the liquid inside shift with a sluggish, uneven movement. You unstopper it. The smell rises immediately, stronger than before, concentrated. Herbal, sharp, with that same underlying bitterness you noticed in the mortar. It's not inviting, but it's not unbearable either, just insistent. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval remedies were administered as tonics or draughts, liquids meant to be consumed in measured amounts, often multiple times a day, based on the belief that gradual rebalancing of the body's humors was necessary for recovery. You tilt the bottle slightly, remembering the instructions. A small amount, you pour just enough into the lid, because apparently That's your measuring tool now, and pause. This is the moment, second joke of the night. You've officially reached the part of the experience where your survival instincts and your curiosity are having a very intense, very quiet argument. You take a breath, then bring the lid to your lips and drink. The taste arrives in layers. First, the bitterness, sharp, immediate, impossible to ignore. Then something sour, cutting through it. And finally, a faint sweetness that feels less like a reward and more like a polite afterthought. You swallow quickly, resisting the urge to make a face. It's not the worst thing you've ever tasted, but it's definitely in the conversation. You replace the stopper carefully, as if the bottle might take offense otherwise, and sit there for a moment, waiting. For what exactly? You're not sure. A sudden transformation, a subtle shift, a dramatic realization that your humors are now perfectly aligned. Nothing happens, at least nothing immediate. And that's the point, really. These remedies aren't designed for instant results. They're slow, deliberate, built on the idea that healing is a process, not a switch you flip. You lean back slightly against the wall, letting the taste fade as best it can. The street continues around you, unchanged by your small experiment. A woman passes by carrying a basket of bread, the smell briefly cutting through the lingering bitterness. You consider for a moment, chasing that scent like it's the solution to all your problems, but you stay where you are. Nearby, two men are talking, loud enough that you catch fragments of their conversation. One mentions a remedy he tried recently, something involving garlic and vinegar. The other nods, adding his own experience with a different mixture that sounds equally ambitious. It hits you then. Everyone here has their own version of this, their own visit, their own bottle, their own cautious hope that what they've been given will help. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval people often combined medical treatments with beliefs in astrology, timing remedies according to planetary positions or phases of the moon. So if your potion doesn't seem to work immediately, there's always the possibility that Mercury is simply not cooperating. You glance up at the sky, as if checking whether the planets are currently aligned in your favor. They offer no clear answer. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of medieval treatments was primarily due to the ingredients themselves or the broader context of belief, ritual, and expectation surrounding them. Sitting here, having just taken your first dose, you can feel that blend. Part physical, part psychological, part. Let's see what happens. You stand again, brushing off your hands, and begin to walk. The city feels slightly different now, not because it's changed, but because you have. You're moving through it with a new awareness, a subtle connection to the network of knowledge and tradition that led you to that shop. You pass by other storefronts, bakers, blacksmiths, traders, all focused on their own crafts. Each one offers something tangible, something immediate. The apothecary, though, deals in something less certain, potential. You reach a small well and pause, drawing a bit of water to rinse the lingering taste from your mouth. It helps, though not completely. Some flavors, it seems, are determined to stay with you. Third joke of the night. You're going to be thinking about that taste at least 3 hours from now, possibly during a completely unrelated moment, like trying to enjoy bread or questioning your life choices. You take a sip of water, then another, letting it settle. There's a part of you that wonders, quietly, persistently, whether this will actually work. Whether the mixture you just swallowed will do anything at all beyond giving you a story to tell. But then again, that's always been part of medicine, hasn't it? Even now in your own time there's an element of trust, of waiting, of not knowing immediately. You tuck the bottle away again, more carefully this time, and secure the pouch of herbs. You'll need to prepare that later. Steep it, drink it, continue the process. This isn't a one-time thing, it's a routine now. A small ritual you'll repeat, following instructions that were passed down through years of practice and belief. As you continue walking, the sounds of the street blend into a steady rhythm. Footsteps, voices, the occasional distant clang of metal. Life goes on around you as it always does, and you carry your remedy with you, a quiet companion, not a guarantee, not a miracle, just a possibility. And as the day unfolds, stretching ahead with all its ordinary moments, you realize that sometimes that's enough to have something in hand, something to try, something that turns uncertainty into action, even if it tastes a little questionable along the way. Word count 1559. By the time the day begins to soften into evening, you've taken another dose, not dramatically, not heroically, just steadily. The way the apothecary instructed, as if this quiet repetition is more important than any single moment of action. The bottle feels lighter now in your hand, not just physically, but somehow in meaning too. Less mysterious, more familiar. Still not trustworthy, exactly, but familiar. You sit near a small window, wherever you've found yourself for the night. A modest space with just enough light slipping in to catch the edge of the glass bottle resting beside you. Outside, the sounds of the street have dulled into a low murmur, replaced by the occasional footstep and distant voices winding down. It's quieter now, and in that quiet you begin to notice things, not dramatic changes. Nothing sudden or overwhelming, just small shifts, subtle enough that you question whether they're real or imagined. A slight easing of whatever brought you to the apothecary in the first place. A sense of your body settling into itself a little more comfortably. Or maybe it's just the passage of time. That's the thing about remedies like this. They don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with certainty. They blend into your experience, making it hard to separate cause from coincidence. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval treatments often worked alongside the body's natural healing processes, meaning that improvement, when it came, was gradual and difficult to attribute to any single remedy. People trusted in a combination of medicine, rest, and time. You roll the bottle gently between your fingers, watching the remaining liquid shift inside. It's still the same color, the same texture, the same slightly questionable promise. And yet, it feels different now. You think back to the apothecary shop, the shelves, the herbs, the quiet presence of the person who handed this to you. There was confidence there. Not arrogance, not certainty, but a kind of practiced belief, and that belief lingers with you. Second joke of the night. At this point, you're about 40% convinced the potion is working, 40% convinced your body is just doing its own thing, and 20% convinced the real cure was surviving that taste twice. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax. The pouch of herbs sits nearby, still tied, waiting for its turn. You'll prepare it soon, steep it as instructed, continue the process. Because that's what this is now, a process, a rhythm, not so different, really, from the train you rode earlier, or the tavern you sat in before that. Different settings, different centuries, but the same underlying idea. People finding ways to move through uncertainty, to create structure where there is none. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval apothecaries included charms or written incantations alongside physical remedies, blending medicine with elements of spiritual protection. So if your treatment ever feels incomplete, just imagine there might have been an optional mystical add-on package you didn't select. You glance at the bottle again, half expecting it to glow faintly or whisper something cryptic. It does neither, probably for the best. Historians still argue whether the success of apothecary treatments depended more on their ingredients, or on the trust placed in the healer and the ritual itself. Sitting here, feeling that quiet, gradual shift, real or imagined, you can understand why the answer isn't simple. It's not just about what's in the bottle, it's about the act of taking it. The decision to do something, to engage with your own condition rather than simply endure it. You reach for the pouch, loosening the string and letting the dried herbs fall into a small cup. You add hot water, carefully, slowly, and watch as the liquid begins to change, darkening, releasing that same layered scent you first encountered in the shop. It's gentler this time, less sharp, more rounded. You wait a moment, letting it steep, the steam rising in soft curls. There's something calming about it, this small ritual, measured, intentional, unhurried. You lift the cup and take a sip. It's better, not exactly delicious, but more approachable. The bitterness is there, but softened, balanced by something warmer. You can see why this part of the treatment exists, not just for effect, but for experience. Third joke of the night. Congratulations, you've officially upgraded from mysterious potion to medieval herbal tea, which sounds significantly more relaxing until you remember both came from the same shelf. You take another sip, slower this time. Outside, the light continues to fade, the last traces of day slipping into evening. The world quiets further, the rhythm of life easing into something softer, and you sit there with your cup, your bottle, and your thoughts. You think about the people who have stood where you are, centuries of them, walking into shops like that one, trusting in mixtures and methods that were the best available at the time. They didn't have certainty, they didn't have guarantees, they had this. And somehow it was enough. You finish the tea, setting the cup aside, and let the silence settle around you. Your body feels steadier, perhaps, or maybe just calmer. Either way, you don't question it too much. Not tonight. You pick up the bottle one last time, holding it in the dimming light. It's no longer just an object. It's part of a story now. Your story in this moment. A small piece of a much larger world. You place it down gently, as if acknowledging that its role for now is complete. And as the night settles in, wrapping everything in a quieter, softer stillness, you allow yourself to rest, not just from the day, but from the uncertainty that brought you here. Because whether the remedy worked or not, you did something about it. You stepped into a place of knowledge and mystery, trusted in it just enough, and carried that trust forward. And sometimes that's its own kind of comfort. How people kept warm in winter before central heating. You wake up already cold, not dramatically cold, not cinematic snowstorm cold, just that quiet, creeping chill that settled into your bones sometime during the night and decided to stay. The kind that makes you hesitate before moving. Because moving means leaving the small pocket of warmth you've built under layers of fabric and breath. You lie there for a moment, aware of your own heat, contained and fragile, like it might slip away if you move too quickly. And that's exactly the problem you're solving all winter long. Not creating warmth out of nothing, but trapping what little warmth you already have. So you begin with layers, not fashion layers. Survival layers. Your first layer is linen, usually a simple shirt or shift worn close to the skin. It's not particularly warm, but it serves an important role, absorbing sweat, keeping your outer garments from becoming damp and uncomfortable. Because dampness, as you've learned the hard way, is basically an invitation for cold to move in and redecorate your entire existence. Over that, you add wool. Thick, slightly scratchy, but undeniably effective. Wool traps air, and trapped air is your best ally here. It's not about the fabric itself being hot. It's about creating tiny pockets where your body heat can linger, instead of escaping into the indifferent winter air. A well-established historical fact. Wool was the dominant cold-weather fabric across Europe for centuries precisely because of this insulating property. Even when damp, it's not glamorous, but it works. You pull on another layer, and maybe another, because more is more, and subtlety is not part of today's plan. Your movements are slower now, partly from the cold, partly from the sheer bulk of what you're wearing. Bending your arms feels like negotiating with a stack of blankets. You briefly wonder if this is what it's like to be a walking pile of laundry. An odd callback to that earlier life of scrubbing and wringing, except now you are the layered fabric. You add fur if you have it. Not everyone does, but if you're lucky or wealthy, fur becomes your outer shield. Animal pelts, lined coats, heavy cloaks. They're warm, yes, but also slightly heavy, slightly awkward, and occasionally still carrying a faint memory of their original owner. You try not to think about that too much. Here's a quirky detail. Some cultures believe that wearing certain animal furs transferred qualities of the animal. Strength, endurance, resilience. Whether or not that's true, you wouldn't mind borrowing a little extra resilience right now. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were symbolic or genuinely taken as practical truths. Standing here, layering up like a human onion, you're open to anything that might help. You wrap a scarf or cloth around your neck, because heat escapes quickly from exposed areas. Your hands are next, gloves or mittens if you have them, though they're often bulky and make fine tasks feel like you're wearing small, uncooperative pillows. Your feet, though, your feet are critical. Cold feet can ruin everything. You pull on thick socks, maybe multiple pairs, made of wool if possible. Shoes or boots go over them, often lined, sometimes padded with straw or cloth for extra insulation. Yes, straw. It's not glamorous, but it adds a layer of trapped air and keeps your feet slightly less miserable. Think of it as the original thermal insert, just with more agricultural energy, fully layered, and immediately notice the difference. Not warmth, exactly, but less cold, which in this context is basically a victory. The room around you is still chilly. Your breath might even be visible, a faint cloud that appears and disappears, like a reminder that you're alive and slightly uncomfortable. The walls offer little help. Insulation as a concept is still more hope than reality, so your clothing becomes your first line of defense. Portable warmth, personal insulation. You move around slowly at first, letting your body generate heat through motion. That's another key part of the system, activity. Standing still is the enemy. The more you move, the more heat you produce and the more those layers can trap. It's a delicate balance. Too much movement and you sweat. Sweat leads to dampness. Dampness leads to cold. Congratulations, you've created your own personal winter hazard. So you pace yourself. There's a rhythm to dressing like this every day. You learn what works, what doesn't, which layers itch less, which combinations trap heat better, which garments have that one annoying seam that suddenly feels like a personal attack after 3 hours. You adjust as needed. And then there are the extremes. Particularly harsh winters push people to creative solutions. Extra layers piled on, sometimes to the point where movement becomes almost comical. You imagine someone trying to sit down and just bouncing slightly because there's too much fabric involved. A light joke forms. If you fall over, it might take a minute to get back up, not because you're hurt, but because you're essentially wrapped in your own insulation system. You'd laugh, but your face is slightly numb. As the day begins, you step outside or into a colder part of the house, and the air greets you with that familiar bite. It finds the gaps. It always finds the gaps around your wrists, your neck, your ankles. Tiny invasions of cold that remind you this is an ongoing battle, not a one-time fix. You pull your cloak tighter. Layering isn't just about warmth. It's about control. You can add, remove, adjust. It's the closest thing you have to a thermostat, except the thermostat is your own body and a stack of wool. And yet, even with all this, you're never completely warm. Not in the way modern comfort would define it. You're managing the cold, negotiating with it, keeping it at a distance rather than eliminating it. There's a certain resilience in that, a quiet endurance. You go about your tasks, feeling the weight of your clothing, the slight restriction in your movements, the constant awareness of temperature. It becomes background noise after a while, something you stop actively thinking about. But it never fully disappears, because winter in this world is not something you escape. It's something you carry with you, layer by layer, breath by breath, step by step. And as you move through the day, wrapped in wool and habit, you understand that this is just the beginning. Clothing keeps you going, yes, but it's the fire, the constant demanding, never quite satisfied fire, that will decide how warm you really get. The layers help, but they don't solve everything. You feel it almost immediately. The cold still lingers in the air around you, drifting through the room like it owns the place, which, in a way, it does. So you turn to the one thing that can actually push it back: fire. Not the cozy, decorative kind you might imagine, but a demanding, temperamental presence that requires constant attention. You approach the hearth, which sits at the heart of your home, not just physically, but functionally. Without it, winter isn't just uncomfortable, it's unmanageable. The fire you're about to tend is already alive, but barely. Embers glow faintly beneath a layer of ash, like they're deciding whether today is worth the effort. You crouch down, feeling the cold floor through your layers, and begin the careful process of coaxing it back. You add kindling first, small dry sticks that catch easily, then slightly larger pieces. You blow gently, sending a stream of air into the embers. They respond slowly, then with a flicker of orange. A small flame appears, hesitant at first, then steadier. There's a quiet satisfaction in that moment. You've convinced something reluctant to cooperate. A mainstream historical fact. Before central heating, the hearth was the primary source of warmth in most homes, especially in Europe and North America. Entire daily routines revolved around maintaining it. Cooking, heating, even socializing happened around this one spot. You feed the fire carefully. Too much wood too quickly, and you risk smothering it. Too little, and it fades back into stubborn embers. It's a balance you learn through repetition, not theory. The smell of smoke begins to fill the air, familiar and slightly sharp. It clings to everything: your clothes, your hair, the walls. Over time, it becomes part of the environment, something you stop noticing unless it changes suddenly. You sit closer now, extending your hands toward the growing warmth. The heat reaches you in waves, uneven but welcome. Your fingers, stiff from the cold, begin to loosen slightly. But here's the thing, the fire doesn't heat the whole room. Not really. It creates a zone, a small, warm territory that fades quickly as you move away. A few steps back, and the cold starts creeping in again, like it's waiting just outside the boundary. You shift your chair closer, everyone does. Furniture tends to cluster around the hearth in winter, not for decoration but necessity. Chairs, stools, even beds sometimes, pulled into that circle of warmth. It's the original gather around the fire moment, except it's less about storytelling and more about not freezing. Though to be fair, storytelling does happen. It's one of the few ways to pass the long winter evenings, when daylight disappears early and the fire becomes both heat and entertainment. You glance at the flames. They move unpredictably, dancing, flickering, collapsing, rebuilding. It's almost hypnotic. You understand why people could sit and watch them for long stretches. It's warmth and movement in a world that feels otherwise still and cold. A small joke crosses your mind. This is the original streaming service. Live Fire, no subscription required but constant maintenance fees in the form of wood. And wood, as it turns out, is everything. Keeping a fire going isn't just about tending it, it's about feeding it. Which means gathering, chopping, and storing enough fuel to last through the winter. That's not a small task. It's a seasonal mission. You imagine the stacks of firewood outside, carefully piled, each log representing future warmth, each one also representing past effort. Hours of chopping, hauling, arranging. You don't just burn wood, you burn time. If you run out, the consequences are immediate and unpleasant. So you monitor the fire like it's a living thing. You adjust logs, shift embers, add fuel at just the right moment. Too late and the fire weakens. There's a rhythm to it, a bad. Wait, adjust, repeat, and then there's the smoke. Not all homes have perfect chimneys. Some have rudimentary systems, others barely manage at all. Smoke can linger, drift back into the room, sting your eyes. You get used to it mostly. But every now and then it reminds you who's in charge. You cough lightly, wave a hand through the air, and adjust your position, closer to the heat, but not directly in the path of the smoke. It's a delicate negotiation. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval homes, people believed certain types of wood produced healthier smoke, or even protective effects against illness. Whether that's true is questionable, but when you're relying on fire this much, you start to assign it extra importance. Historians still argue whether these beliefs had any practical basis, or were simply attempts to make sense of something essential but unpredictable. Either way, you can't be too picky. You burn what you have. As the fire grows stronger, the immediate area becomes genuinely comfortable. Not hot, not luxurious, but enough that you can relax slightly. You stretch your legs toward the hearth, feeling the warmth seep through layers of fabric. Your back, meanwhile, remains cooler. That's another challenge. Heat is directional. One side warms, the other waits its turn. You rotate occasionally, like a very patient rotisserie chicken. Yes, that image lingers for a second. You decide not to share it out loud. The fire also dictates your schedule. You can't just leave it unattended for long periods. If you go out, someone needs to watch it. If you sleep, you either let it die down and accept a cold morning or bank it carefully. Covering embers with ash to preserve heat overnight. Banking a fire is an art in itself. Done correctly, you wake to a faint but living glow, ready to be revived. Done poorly, and you start from scratch in a freezing room, questioning your life choices. You've experienced both. There's a moment now where you lean in, hands extended, feeling the heat more fully. Your fingers tingle as circulation returns. It's a small, almost luxurious sensation. And yet you know this warmth is temporary, conditional. It depends on your attention, your fuel, your ability to keep the system going. You glance at the woodpile again, mentally calculating how much you've used already. Winter is long, longer than it feels like it should be. Still, for now, the fire burns steadily. You settle into your seat, letting the warmth do its work. The crackle of wood, the shifting glow of embers, the soft hum of heat. It all blends into a kind of quiet comfort, not perfect, not effortless, but real. And as you sit there, wrapped in layers and firelight, you understand something simple and essential. Warmth, in this world, isn't given, it's made. And it has to be made again, and again, and again. The fire fades as the evening stretches on, not dramatically, just enough that you notice the edges of the room slipping back into cold. You've been rotating like a patient rotisserie. Yes, still a valid image, warming one side then the other. But now it's time to face the part of winter that doesn't care how well you tended the flames, night. You prepare for it with a quiet sense of strategy, because sleep in winter isn't just rest. It's survival with a blanket. You move toward your bed, which looks inviting in theory and suspicious in practice, because right now it's cold. Not cool and refreshing cold, just unwelcoming. The kind of cold that makes you hesitate, hovering nearby as if the bed might bite back. So you prepare it first. Blankets are everything. Heavy woolen ones, layered thick, sometimes rough but dependable. You stack them, adjust them, build what is essentially a soft fortress designed to trap every bit of heat you can produce. Feather-filled bedding, if you have it, is even better. Light yet insulating, holding warmth in a way that feels almost magical compared to plain cloth. A mainstream historical fact, feather beds and wool blankets were among the most effective bedding materials before modern insulation, prized for their ability to retain heat through trapped air. You run your hand over the surface, still cold. Of course it is, which is why you reach for the bed warmer. This is not a metaphor. It's a literal object, usually a metal pan with a long handle, filled with hot coals from the fire. You slide it between the sheets, moving it back and forth to warm the fabric before you get in. It's careful work because too much heat in one spot could scorch the bedding. Too little, and you've just politely rearranged the cold. You guide it slowly, like you're ironing the bed with fire. There's something oddly satisfying about it, though. The faint warmth spreading through the layers, the knowledge that you're improving your future comfort, even if only slightly, a quirky detail. Some people decorated bed warmers with intricate patterns or engravings, turning this practical tool into something almost ornamental. Because if you're going to heat your bed with a pan of coals, you might as well do it with style. Historians still argue whether bed warmers were universally common or more typical in wealthier households, but versions of the idea appear across many cultures. Everyone, it seems, agreed that climbing into an ice-cold bed was unacceptable. You remove the warmer, set it aside safely, and take a breath. This is the moment. You climb in. There's always a brief shock, less severe now thanks to your preparation, but still noticeable. The sheets are warmer, yes, but not exactly cozy. You settle quickly, pulling blankets up, tucking them around you with practiced efficiency. You become very still because movement lets heat escape. Stillness lets it build. At first, it's just you and the cold negotiating. Your body begins to generate warmth slowly, gradually. The layers above you trap it, holding it close. Over time, the space beneath the blankets transforms from chilly to tolerable, from tolerable, comfortable. It takes patience. You curl slightly, minimizing exposed surface area. It's instinctive, efficient. Your breath warms the air near your face, creating a tiny pocket of comfort. And then there's the question of company. Not necessarily for romance, though that exists, but for warmth. Sharing a bed isn't unusual. In fact, it's practical. Another body means more warmth to trap beneath those blankets. Families, children, even occasionally servants or guests might share sleeping spaces, especially in colder conditions. You imagine the collective warmth, the shared space, the subtle trade-off between personal comfort and actual temperature regulation. A light joke slips in. Personal space is a luxury, but frostbite is worse. You shift slightly, finding a position that works. The mattress beneath you, often straw-filled or simple, offers limited insulation, so you rely heavily on what's above you. Some people even placed extra blankets or furs underneath for added warmth, creating layers both above and below. The room itself remains cold. The fire, unless carefully maintained, has likely died down or been banked for the night. You can't rely on it now. This is a different system, one of containment rather than generation. You listen, the quiet is different at night, softer, deeper. The occasional creak of the structure, the faint whistle of wind finding its way through cracks. Because no matter how well you prepare, the cold still searches for entry points. You pull the blankets tighter. There's another trick some people use, heated objects placed in the bed. Not just bed warmers, but stones warmed by the fire, wrapped in cloth tucked near your feet. It's simple, effective, and slightly risky if you forget how hot they are. Warm feet, though, that's worth the effort. You flex your toe, feeling the gradual return of comfort. It's not instant. Nothing about this is instant. That's the recurring theme. You earn your warmth slowly through preparation and patience. Historians still argue whether people slept as comfortably as we assume or simply adapted to a lower baseline of warmth. Lying here, waiting for the cold to ease its grip, you suspect it's a bit of both. You adjust again, settling deeper into the bed. The blankets press down gently, creating that familiar cocoon effect. Your body heat builds, circulates, stabilizes, and then finally you feel it. Warmth not overwhelming, not luxurious but enough. Enough to relax your shoulders, to slow your breathing, to let your mind drift slightly. Outside, the winter continues without you. The cold remains, steady and patient. But here, in this small pocket you've created, it's held at bay. You think briefly about how much effort this took. The layers, the fire, the preparation, the careful management of every detail just to reach this point. And then you stop thinking about it, because you're warm now. And that's all that matters. You close your eyes, listening to the quiet, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of your own heat, contained within blankets and habit. Tomorrow you'll do it all again, but for now you rest. Morning arrives the same way it always does in winter, quietly, and a little too cold for your liking. You wake before you're ready, not because of noise, but because the warmth you built overnight has thinned out. The blanket still holds some heat, but it's fading, slipping away as the room presses in again. You stay still for a moment, hoping optimistically that remaining under the covers might somehow reverse time. It does not, so you prepare to face the cold again, but this time not just with layers or fire. Now it's about the space itself. The walls, the windows, the quiet battle against drafts that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. You sit up, reluctantly, and feel that familiar chill wrap around you like an uninvited guest. The room hasn't improved overnight. If anything, it's worse. Fires die, embers fade, and unless someone woke in the night to tend them, the house has cooled significantly. Which means you're starting over. But before the fire, before the layers fully settle back in, you notice the subtle defenses already in place. The ways people have tried to make the building itself less hostile. The walls, for instance. In wealthier homes or certain regions, they're thick, stone, brick, or layered materials designed not just for structure but for insulation. Thick walls slow the movement of heat, keeping warmth in longer than thin wooden boards ever could. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval stone houses and later brick constructions provided better thermal mass, helping retain heat from fires longer than lighter materials. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward controlling the indoor climate. You run your hand along the wall. It's cool, but not as biting as the open air. That's something. Then there are the windows, or rather, the places where windows try to be. Glass, if present at all, is often small, uneven, and not particularly insulating. In many homes, windows are covered at night with shutters, cloth, or even oiled paper to reduce heat loss. You move to one now, adjusting the covering. A faint draft brushes your fingers, sneaking through a gap you hadn't noticed yesterday. Of course it did. You press the cloth tighter, maybe wedge something into the corner. A bit of fabric, a rolled scrap, anything to block that tiny but persistent stream of cold air. It's a small fix, but it matters. In a space where every degree of warmth is earned, even minor leaks feel like betrayal, a quirky detail. In some places, people hung thick tapestries or rugs on walls, not just for decoration but for insulation. These fabric layers helped trap heat and reduce drafts, turning bare walls into something a little more cooperative. You glance at the wall again, imagining it covered in heavy fabric. It makes sense. Less cold surface, more trapped air. It's basically giving your house its own set of winter layers. Historians still argue whether these decorative elements were primarily aesthetic or functional. But when you're standing in a cold room, it's hard to believe warmth wasn't part of the plan. You move around the space, checking for other drafts. Doors are another weak point. Gaps at the bottom, edges that don't quite seal. You might place a rolled cloth or a simple barrier along the base. What modern minds would call a draft stopper, but here it's just common sense. Every gap you close is a small victory. The floor too plays a role. Stone or packed earth can feel like a direct connection to the cold ground below. Wooden floors are slightly better but still far from warm. You might lay down rugs, straw, or mats. Anything to create a barrier between your feet and the chill beneath. You step onto a rug now and feel the difference immediately. It's not warm, but it's less cold. Again, that subtle improvement that defines winter survival. You think briefly about how modern insulation works. Hidden layers inside walls, sealed windows, controlled airflow. Then you look around at your current setup. Cloth, straw, thick walls, careful positioning, different tools. Same goal. You move back toward the hearth because no amount of insulation replaces actual heat. But now the space feels slightly more contained. Not warm yet, but less exposed, that's the idea. As you prepare to relight the fire, you notice how everything works together. Your clothing traps heat close to your body. The fire generates warmth. The house, imperfect as it is, tries to hold on to that warmth for as long as possible. It's a system. A fragile one, but a system nonetheless. You crouch by the hearth again, repeating the now familiar process. Kindling, breath, patience. The fire responds slowly, then more eagerly, sending out that first wave of heat that feels like a promise. You sit back, letting it reach you, and as it does, you realize something. Warmth in this world isn't a single solution. It's layers upon layers of effort. Clothing, fire, bedding, structure. All working together to push back against something that never really leaves. A light joke drifts through your mind. If winter were a person, it would be that guest who never takes the hint and just keeps coming back. You almost smile, because you've learned how to deal with it, not perfectly, but effectively enough. You adjust your position, closer to the fire, within the insulated space you've shaped. The room begins to feel different again. Not warm exactly, but manageable. And that's the quiet goal. Not to eliminate the cold entirely, but to stay one step ahead of it. To layer, to block, to contain, to adapt. You pull your cloak tighter, extend your hands toward the growing fire, and settle into the rhythm you now understand. Winter is still here, but so are you.